Some creatures in Dungeons & Dragons are significantly more challenging to run for a Dungeon Master than others, and often for a variety of different reasons. So today we'll be going over some of the most complicated monsters to run in a campaign. Kicking off list at number 10, we have the Drow Matron Mother. The Matron Mother is a CR20 humanoid. As a Drow, they come with the natural Drow racial abilities such as immunity to sleep, summon 8 spellcasting abilities, advantage on saves versus being charmed, and sensitivity to sunlight. Drow Matron Mothers also have a fully prepared list of cleric spells as if they were 18th level clerics. This alone makes her nearly as complex as a high level player character. Drow Matron Mothers also have legendary distinction, giving them the legendary actions. Legendary actions are actions a creature can use at the end of another creature's turn, usually up to 3 times per round, though some abilities require more than one legendary action to use. A creature that potentially has 4 actions a round is a lot more complex to run in an encounter than one that only has its regular action on its turn. Matron Mothers can use legendary actions to do their normal attacks like most creatures with the feature, but they can also cast a spell as a legendary action, expending 1 action per level expended. The Matron Mother's basic attacks both include nasty side effects. Its Demon Staff attack allows it to do a decent bit of damage, but also causes a Wisdom saving throw on the target or else they become frightened of the Matron Mother. Its other basic attack is a Tentacle Rod, which forces a Constitution saving throw or the target suffers multiple debilitating effects akin to the Slow spell. Halved movement speed, disadvantage on dexterity saves, no reactions, and they can only use an action or bonus action on its turn, but not both. A real nasty side effect, and the Matron Mother can attack 3 times with this. The last Drow Matron Mother ability is to summon a CR10 Yaklal Demon as an action. A creature that's a fairly interesting, shape-changing, spellcasting monster in its own right, basically adding all the Yaklal's complexity to the Drow Matron Mothers. She can even use 2 legendary actions to allow the Yaklal to attack a creature of her choice. On top of all this, they even have a constant useful bonus action ability to give advantage to their allies in their next attack roll, at the cost of a little bit of psychic damage, courtesy of the evil god Loth that they worship. Narratively, Drow Matron Mothers are the top dogs of their entire society. They're some of the biggest players in the Underdark, and it's normally implied that a Drow Matron Mother also has a full retinue of other Drow monsters at their beck and call. The Drow Matron Mother's combination of legendary abilities, summoning, high-level spellcasting, and its station as the overseer of a ruler of an entire society of Drow makes the Drow Matron Mother one of the most complex monsters to run in the game. And next up at number 9, we have Aboleths. Aboleths are CR10 aberrations. They have a variety of disturbing effects that make them one of the most interesting and complex creatures to run in a game. An Aboleth's main stat block isn't too dense. Like the previous entry, they come equipped with legendary actions. In the case of Aboleths, they have 3 legendary actions they can use to either make perception checks, do their basic tail attack, or spend 2 actions, deal 3d6 damage to a creature they have charmed, and heal that damage back on themselves. Another challenging aspect of Aboleths is that they are strictly aquatic creatures, and aquatic combat naturally adds another layer of complications to an encounter. Onto the regular abilities. They passively project a mucus cloud that can inflict a disease on any creature that attacks it in melee. This disease makes the creature only able to breathe water if they fail a constitution save, which might force the creature to be stuck in the water with the aboleth or risk suffocation. They can also enslave others up to 3 times per day, giving them the inherent ability to add other monsters or even players to their side in and out of combat, and then use the health leeching legendary action on them. Their normal tentacle attack also comes with a similar disease side effect to the mucus cloud, though instead of preventing breathing outside of water, it causes the afflicted to suffer acid damage constantly, and prevents them from gaining health while out of water, inevitably killing them unless they become cured or stay in the water. It even has a unique form of telepathy that lets it automatically know the deepest desire of any creature that communicates with it telepathically, if the aboleth can see the creature. They also have 2 new types of features complicated monsters often have: regional effects and layer actions. These features will be common for most of the creatures on this list due to the added complexity these additional features create. Regional effects are effects that project in a wider area from the creature's lair, allowed to interact with the players even outside of traditional combat. With the aboleth's regional effects, everything underground within 1 mile region of the aboleth's lair is slimy, difficult terrain. It also makes water supernaturally brackish in a 1 mile area, making it impossible to drink. And as an action, it can project an illusion of itself anywhere in that 1 mile region it has seen or somewhere a creature it's enslaved to can see. The aboleth can sense, speak, and use telepathy from said illusion. Next is the layer actions. Layer actions happen automatically on initiative count 20 and are similar to legendary actions, and that they add unique actions the monsters can do outside of their regular turn. Typically, they have restrictions that you can't use the same layer action 2 turns in a row, giving you yet another thing to keep track of. In the case of the aboleth, it can choose between casting Phantasm Force on all creatures it can see within 60 feet, dragging any creature within 20 feet of a pool of water into a pool on a strength saving throw, or mentally assaulting all creatures it can see within 90 feet for 2d6 psychic damage. Aboleth set the bar for complex monsters that's powerful, dangerous, and has far-reaching narrative potential. And at number 8, we have the Beholder. Beholders are CR13 aberrations. Beholders have a slew of iconic features that originated with them. Despite their popularity, this many unique abilities certainly makes them a fairly complicated creature to run. Starting off with its 2 regional effects. Any creature within a mile of the Beholder's lair feels like they're always being watched. Next, when the Beholder sleeps, it creates minor reality warps in a 1 mile radius that vanish 24 hours later. This alone creates nearly infinite options, only limited by your imagination, as it gives you free reign to just make any minor, impossible event happen to players as they get closer to the Beholder. Examples include slime appearing on a statue out of nowhere, marks or signs randomly changing, trinkets of unusual nature appearing out of nowhere, and so on and so on. And then there's the Beholder's lair actions, which allows it to either create a 50-foot square area of slimy difficult terrain, make walls manifest grasping appendages that can grapple any creatures within 10 feet of the wall, and lastly, it can make an eye appear on a solid surface that shoots one of the Beholder's many eye rays, chosen at random, at a target. Speaking of eye rays, the Beholder's main form of action in combat is its 10 eye rays. On its turn, a Beholder uses up to 3 random rays from a list of 10. These rays can be sorted into status effect rays and damage rays. The status effect rays are the Charming Ray, Paralyzing Ray, Fear Ray, Slowing Ray, Sleep Ray, Petrification Ray, and the Telekinetic Ray. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, including the stated status effect on a failed save. Or with the Telekinetic Ray, letting the Beholder restrain and telekinetically move a creature or manipulate objects at a distance. Then there's the 3 damaging rays, the Innervation Ray, the Disintegration Ray, and the Death Ray. The Innervation Ray is the weakest, only dealing 8d8 necrotic on a failed save, but does still do half damage on a success, unlike the other 2. The Disintegration Ray does a higher 10d8 damage on a failed save, and any creature reduces 0 hit points by it has their body turned to dust. Finally, the Death Ray is the deadliest at 10d10 necrotic damage on a failed save that instantly kills any creature reduced to 0 hit points by it. The Beholder also gets 3 legendary actions where it uses 1 random ray each time. Each ray has its own little mechanics entry, but that's not even the most complicated part about the Beholder. Famously, the Beholder's enormous central eye projects an anti-magic field in a gargantuan 150-foot cone that it points at an area at the start of its turn. This is one of the most geometrically challenging abilities in the game, as projecting a cone that big in 3-dimensional space from a creature that is always floating in the air, and keeping track of that on the battlefield is quite an endeavor. Not to mention the natural challenges of consistently applying anti-magic to any creature in the cone, such as making sure players are taking into account lost passive magic effects, negating the effects of any non-magical equipment, temporarily losing concentration effects, or any buffs they might have cast on themselves otherwise. Beholders, as befits their notoriety, are quite a complex creature to run just for the sheer number of unique abilities it has and the innate chaos of having to use these rays at random. A Dungeon Master can even play a strategy around how to use this inherently random monster. And at number 7, we have Elderbrain. Elderbrain is a CR14 aberration and acts as the central hive mind of an entire Mind Flayer colony. It's the first creature on this list with legendary resistances, which allows a legendary monster to automatically succeed on its saving throw 3 times a day, a trait that will be common going forward on this list. It also has 3 regional effects. The first makes every creature in 5 miles feel like they're being followed. The second, it can overhear telepathic communication within 5 miles of it, letting it snoop in on anyone interacting with any of the Mind Flayers in its realm or using their own telepathy, such as with a familiar. Lastly, any creature psychically linked with the Elderbrain constantly hears whispers in the recesses of its mind. Nothing too crazy, but managing a vast psychic network does present its own set of challenges to run. For layer actions, the Elderbrain can cast Wall of Force, one of the more highly complex control spells in the game. It can grant friendly creatures inspiration on a d20 roll of its choice before the end of its next turn. Finally, it can make any creature within 120 feet of it make a charisma saving throw or be unable to leave its current space, crushed by the Elderbrain's sheer force of will. As far as the Elderbrain's native abilities, it has a creature sense power that makes it always aware of the presence of any creature with 4 intelligence or higher within 5 miles of it, so long as it isn't magically protected, making stealth and infiltration in the Elderbrain's domain incredibly difficult. It also has some innate psionic spellcasting, allowing it to cast Dominate Monster, Levitate, Detect Thoughts, or Plane Shift. For actions, it can attack with a tentacle, which does some damage and grapples a creature. It can create a psychic link with any creature that's incapacitated that detects with its creature sense ability, letting it perceive through the creature, sense its thoughts, and deceive the linked creature into believing ideas or feeling emotions through its link. It can only be broken by making a charisma save as an action. The important thing about this ability is any creature caught resting in the Elderbrain's domain can find itself immediately subject to the telepathic influence, as creature sense has a 5-mile range. So over the course of multiple days delving into the Elderbrain's territory, it's very likely a party is subject to the psychic assault. It also has more direct psychic assaults in combat, with an amped up version of the Mind Flayer's Mind Blast ability, dealing 5d10 plus 5 psychic damage, and stunning the creature and all creatures that fail an intelligence saving throw within 60 feet of the brain. The Elderbrain comes with 4 different legendary actions. The first is its regular tentacle attack. Next, it can break the concentration of a spell on a creature it has a psychic link with, ending the concentration and inflicting 1d4 psychic damage per spell level. The brain can also emit a psychic pulse, dealing 3d6 psychic damage to creatures within 10 feet of any creature it's psychically linked. This ability is something it can use from its own mind flayers or the players themselves. Finally, it can sever any psychic link it has, which ends the link but gives the creature disadvantage in all saves, ability checks, and attack rolls until the end of its next turn. The Elder Brain has a lot of very odd, very unique psychic-based abilities. Its role as not only an encounter, but an omnipresent psychic threat and hub of entire civilization of incredibly dangerous psychic monsters makes it one of the most dynamic enemies in D&D. Coming in number 6, we have vampires. In particular, Strahd von Zarovich, a particularly legendary vampire from Wizards of the Coast Curse of Strahd campaign. Vampires are usually CR 13 undead, but the CR can be altered by variants of the vampire. Vampires have a whole host of abilities that make them especially complex. Naturally, they're legendary creatures, which gives them access to legendary resistances and legendary actions to keep track of. Admittedly, their legendary actions are fairly simple. A movement that doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity, and both of their regular attacks, an unarmed strike, and a bite. Following that, it has 4 regional effects. First, the populations of rats, bats, and wolves in the region noticeably increase. Plants within 500 feet of the lair wither and become twisted and thorny. Shadows cast within 500 feet of its lair become abnormal and moves as if they're alive. Finally, a creeping fog clings to the ground within 500 feet of the lair, which sometimes makes horrifying forms of frightening interlopers. Vampires, unlike most creatures in D&D, have a whole slew of unusual weaknesses to keep track of. Most of these are well known in pop culture, such as burning in the sunlight, getting staked in the heart, weaknesses in running water, etc., etc. That being said, each weakness comes with its own specific mechanical breakdown of the rules for how it will apply to vampires, which is fairly unique to them. Beyond that, vampires have an odd sort of attack pattern, needing to attack with an unarmed strike to set up their more dangerous bite, and having to choose between grappling or doing damage, as they can't bite a creature who isn't grappled or otherwise incapacitated. The bite itself is specific to vampires, as any creature slain by a vampire's bite can be risen in the following night as the vampire spawn, meaning the vampire naturally creates its own army of fairly powerful subjects. Speaking of gaining subjects, vampires have a charm ability it can use as an action to allure a creature into being the vampire's friend, ally, or protector for up to 24 hours. Then you have the odd shape-changing abilities, as they can turn into a bat or a cloud of mist. In Strahd's case, he can also turn into a wolf. The mist form has its own specific rules, which are particularly relevant, as when the vampire is reduced to 0 hit points, it turns into this mist form and attempts to escape to its coffin, usually forcing an interaction with that mechanic upon defeat. Vampires come with a natural kind of regeneration that can only be surpassed by radiant damage. Vampires innately can summon swarms of rats or bats, while Strahd can also summon a large pack of wolves. Vampires also have a variant feature that gives them access to spellcasting, as is the case with Strahd. Throwing the near-endless well of mechanical intricacies that spellcasting adds to a creature is only one of the most effective ways to add complexity. Strahd adds even more layers onto this already dense list of mechanics by having additional access to layer actions and magical giant crystal heart called the Heart of Sorrow's domain that aids him. For Strahd's layer actions, he can pass through solid objects, magically open or shut and lock doors and windows, summon a specter from the dead, or turn a player's shadow against them by manifesting it as an enemy type of shadow. The Heart of Sorrow has its own pool of hit points and absorbs damage dealt to Strahd as he wishes, giving him another odd form of regeneration to overcome. Very few creatures can demand a Dungeon Master's full attention to run properly as well as a vampire, Strahd in particular. And at number 5, we have Mummy Lord. The Mummy Lord is a CR 15 undead creature. It has 3 regional effects. The first causes all food, water, and non-magical drinks to spoil instantly in its lair. Creatures in its lair besides the Mummy Lord who attempt to use divination spells have an added 25% chance of being misled. Lastly, any treasure taken from the lair is cursed until return, with the curse causing the target to have disadvantage in all saving throws. A nasty effect if you don't have the remove curse spell handy. The Mummy Lord also has 3 lair actions. The first allows any undead creature in its lair to know the location of all living creatures in the lair, letting it invalidate stealth as an option. Second, it can give all other undead in the lair advantage on saves against the effects of turn undead, usually a crippling weakness for undead that the Mummy Lord can mitigate. Finally, and perhaps the most powerful, it can make any non-undead creature in its lair that tries to cast a 4th level or lower spell make a constitution save. Now on a fail, the creature takes 1d6 necrotic damage per spell level, and the spell has no effect, wasting the spell slot. The most interesting thing about the Mummy Lord is all of these effects are layer-wide, so the Mummy Lord can activate and use its layer actions even if you're not in direct combat with it. As the players move to the Mummy Lord's lair, it can use its first action to find them, and its other 2 actions to hinder them once it sends its swarm of undead minions after the party, making the Mummy Lord an active threat throughout the entirety of its lair. And that's before we even get to the Mummy Lord's regular abilities. It has the spellcasting capabilities of a 10th level cleric, giving it powerful spells like Harm, Insect Plague, and Spiritual Weapon. The Mummy Lord's basic attack, Rotting Fist, has a side effect of causing the extremely nasty Mummy Rot curse if it hits a creature and fails a Constitution save. Without Remove Curse, the target is almost certainly doomed to die if it's afflicted, as it can't be healed and suffers a 3d6 lowering of maximum hit points daily, turning them to dust if they reach 0 hit points. Its other basic offensive ability is the Dreadful Glare, which you can do in tandem with its Rotting Fist. On a failed Wisdom saving throw, the target is frightened until the Mummy Lord's next turn. But if they fail by 5 or more, they become paralyzed, one of the nastiest effects in D&D. Extra dangerous considering the Mummy Lord, like every monster on this list, has a bevy of legendary actions it can use on the player's turns while they're paralyzed. It has 3 legendary actions per round. It can use them to do its basic Rotting Fist or Dreadful Glare at the cost of 1 action. It can also use Blinding Dust for 1 action to blind every creature within 5 feet of it if they fail a Constitution save. Its next 3 options use 2 legendary actions. One allows it to channel negative energy, causing all creatures in 60 feet of it to become unable to regain hit points to the Mummy Lord's next turn. It can speak a blasphemous word to any creatures in 10 feet of it, forcing a Constitution saving throw or they become stunned. And its final legendary action option, the Mummy Lord can spend 2 actions to magically transform into a whirlwind of sand, allowing it to move 60 feet while being immune to all damage while doing so, before reverting to its normal form afterwards. The Mummy Lord is an expert at applying multiple different status conditions on an entire party over the course of a round. Frightening, stunning, paralyzation, mummy rot, anti-healing, blindness. The sheer number of effects it can lay on a party means quite a lot of clerical work to keep track of everything it's doing in a fight. A powerful enemy with lots of effects to track and a non-stop presence throughout the entire dungeon easily earns the Mummy Lord spot on this list. And at number 4, we have the Lich, also known as a Mind Flayer Lich. The Lich is a CR22 variant form of both the Mind Flayer and Lich, combining the capabilities of both creatures into one diabolic enemy. The Lich is complicated in its own right, being a high difficulty monster with lots of unique abilities and spellcasting capabilities of a full arcane caster. Some of these spells include powerful options such as Power Word Kill or Dominate Monster. Its basic attack is called Paralyzing Touch, which on hit forces a target to make a Constitution saving throw or be paralyzed for 1 minute. As mentioned earlier, paralyzation is one of the nastiest status effects of the game with an abundance of downsides to keep track of. The Lich takes that and adds several Mind Flayer features to its overcrowded list of features. That includes the natural psionic feature, such as the innate ability to cast Levitate, Dominate Monster, Plane Shift, and the Detect Thoughts on top of the Lich's basic spellcasting ability. The Lich also gains even more powerful versions of the Mind Flayer's Extract Brain, Mind Blast, and Tentacle attacks. The Tentacle attack on hit lets the Lich inflict 3d10 plus 5 psychic damage, grapple the target, and make them an intelligence saving throw or be stunned until the grapple ends. And it can be quite hard to break out of the grapple if you're stunned. Extract Brain lets the Lich deal a catastrophic 10d10 piercing damage, which instantly kills the target if it reduces them to 0 as the Lich consumes their brain. Finally, the Mind Blast ability works just like the previously mentioned Elder Brain's Mind Blast, damaging and stunning creatures in a 60-foot cone on a failed intelligence save. As you might expect, the Lich also comes with legendary resistances and actions. The legendary actions you can use its Tentacle attack, spend 2 actions to use Extract Brain, spend all 3 actions to use its Mind Blast, or spend 1, 2, or 3 actions to cast a spell at the spell slot equal to the number of legendary actions expended. The Lich also retains the Lich's Layers actions, allowing it to regain spell slots, split any damage it takes into another creature with a negative energy tether, or force a target within 60 feet of Lich to make a Constitution save or suffer 15d6 necrotic damage as apparitions attack them. Beyond all of that, potentially the ability that requires the most thought and planning about both a Lich and a Lich is the Rejuvenation ability that allows them to revive themselves through the phylactery when they're destroyed. While not a mechanical problem to deal with, having to come up with a suitable, ingenious place to hide a phylactery that a super intelligent Lich might come up with does present its own challenge. The only thing the Lich lacks as a deeply complex creature is a natural way to create or take control of minions and regional effects. But the combination of 2 complicated and very powerful creatures that the Lich embodies earns it a spot on this list. Following that, the number 3 spot on this list, we have Archdevils, in particular, Zariel. Zariel is the most powerful printed Archdevil and a primary figure in the Descent into Avernus campaign module, although she also appears in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes with some other Archdevils. Zariel is a fiend that comes in at a whopping 26 challenge rating. Like many high CR creatures, she comes with interesting regional effects, which includes causing gouts of fire to spew out every 60 feet within a 1 mile radius of her lair, causing heavily obscured smoke to fill everywhere within 2 miles of her lair, and manifesting screams, voices, and the smell of burning meat within 9 miles of her lair. Her stat block befits her super high challenge rating as she has several resistances including cold, fire, and most importantly, radiant damage. The latter is particularly odd for a devil, but comes from her previously being an angel before falling. What's more interesting is Zariel has natural regeneration that can only be stopped by radiant damage, forcing players into a suboptimal damage option to risk her constantly healing herself. She has a short list of innate spellcasting abilities that include powerful spells like Fireball, Blade Barrier, Invisibility, and Finger of Death. Like previous entries, she also comes with legendary resistances and legendary actions. She can use her legendary action to teleport up to 120 feet away, or use an immolating gaze that causes a target within 120 feet of her to combust and suffer 4d10 fire damage on a failed wisdom save. Her regular combat capabilities aren't super complicated on their own. As an action, she can use her previously explained teleport, cause a couple of different damaging attacks, and use an ability called Horrid Touch with poisons, blinds, and deafens a creature for 1 minute on top of doing a massive 8d10 necrotic damage on hit. The most complicated aspect of her abilities is her layer actions. While one simply allows her to just cast the Fireball spell, her other layer actions allow her to cast 4 simultaneous major image spells, each targeting different areas, none of which require concentration. The major image spell also forces a wisdom saving throw or frightens any creature that can see them for 1 minute. Major Image is already a spell that challenges your creativity and imagination, but doing it 4 times for free every other round is on an entirely different level for a creative exercise. This ability alone is one of the most potentially complex actions in the entire game. All of her statistical abilities aside, nothing stands out more for Zariel than her role as the Archdevil of the first layer of Hell, known as Avernus. In a never-ending war against hordes of demons invading from the Abyss, Zariel stands as the most active Archdevil in the 9 Hells. She commands the similarly endless forces of Hell on the front lines of this war. Just being the most powerful Archdevil alone makes her fairly complex, but her political role as a commander of one of the most powerful armies in the multiverse creates a level of scale to the creature that few others can match, which does bring up her opposition. And at number 2, we have the Demon Lords. The Demon Lords are a group of 8 unique fiend monsters of high CR that share certain similarities. They are some of the most powerful fiends printed in the game, which naturally comes with a certain high level of complexity. Each Demon Lord has a far-reaching terrain-warping regional effect. Though the most interesting trait they all share is that creatures that spend an hour within a mile of the Demon Lord must make a wisdom saving throw or be stricken by a type of madness unique to each Demon Lord. Demon Lords each come with a table of 5 different madness effects that is randomly chosen from when their inflicted creatures fails to save. Examples of this include Jubilix Madness that makes creatures want to consume everything they possibly can, or Grisit's Madness, which can cause afflicted players to become deeply narcissistic. Demon Lords are all legendary, as you might expect, and come with a lot of legendary actions, legendary resistances, original effects, and powerful layer actions you would expect for creatures of this status. I could talk all day about the intricacies of each Demon Lord, but there are some standout examples. One of the most implicitly complicated abilities is that of the Prince of Deception, Fraz Urblu. He has a layer action that allows him to create a perfect simulacrum of any humanoid in his lair, typically a player. This simulacrum disappears and the layer action is up again at the top of the round. There's very few things more complex than a high-level player character. The fact that Fraz Urblu can imitate any and all player characters every other turn means that this one ability has the potential to be as complicated and intricate as every single player in a party combined. All of the Demon Lords have innate spellcasting abilities, usually attuned to whatever domain they represent, such as Zugmoy, the Demon Lord of Fungi, Rot and Decay, having access to fungus-themed plant growth and Tangle, and so on. Horcus, the Demon Lord of Undead, has multiple abilities that summon undead monsters for him, including one of his lair actions, his legendary wand's ability to cast Finger of Death and Animate Dead, and the spell Create Undead that he knows as a passive ability. And on top of all of that, he is capable of using Time Stop, which allows him multiple turns to summon an undead horde. There are many more examples of each Demon Lord's unique capabilities that could likely earn all of them a spot on this list. Each of them encompasses an entire domain, rules over endless hordes of demons loyal and fearful to them, and command an extremely high place in their cosmic hierarchy of Dungeons and Dragons. Few, if any, creatures come with the inherent complexities of including a full-fledged Demon Lord in your campaign, with perhaps the exception of the next spot on our list. Topping this list at number 1, we have Auril. Auril is the main antagonist of the Rime of the Frostmaiden adventure module published by Wizards of the Coast. She is an evil goddess of winter and cruelty. As a potential final boss of the campaign, she takes on a weakened form of her usual godlike powers that allows the players to actually fight her. Auril is fairly unique amongst enemies in D&D because she has 3 separate forms: a monstrous humanoid owl creature, a statuesque feminine form made of ice, and a floating gem-like form. Each form has to be defeated in succession, effectively making her as complicated as 3 distinct creatures. She has 3 layer actions. She can teleport anywhere in her lair, telepathically communicate with anyone in it, and automatically knows the health and locations of all creatures there. Fairly straightforward. But it functionally lets her play as if she has all the knowledge the Dungeon Master would, which is a completely different mindset than most monsters can operate with. Not quite as complicated as some of the layer actions of the previous entries in this list, but we're just getting started. Her forms individually aren't super complicated on their own, though bouncing from one form to the next means you have to keep up with a long list of abilities and resources. Each form comes with legendary resistances and actions, although each form has a separate 2 uses of legendary resistances, giving her a total of 6 across all 3 forms. Each form has 1 or 2 distinct legendary action abilities, as well as the ability to attack with the actions. One form has the spellcasting feature, one has the ability to summon creatures, and one creates multiple AoE conditions that just need to be juggled with while running her. Her damage resistances, vulnerabilities, condition immunities, and even her armor class all change as she shifts forms, which itself can cause a bit of stumbling confusion, as one turn a player might hit on a 14, but on the next miss on an 18, something the Dungeon Master can easily slip up on as well. Even her size in the battle map changes. While her entry in the book doesn't technically come with any inherent regional effects like the previous entries in this list, the entire premise of the campaign module is that she has created an everlasting winter over a near continent-sized area of the planet Toril, an effect so powerful it goes beyond a typical regional effect. While the entries in this list have implied armies or storytelling features associated with them, Auril is a central presence of an entire adventure module like Strahd and Zariel, only she has the auspices of being a goddess with an entire religion behind her on top of everything else. Between her near omniscient and omnipresent status on the battlefield, the full array of legendary abilities, and the density of having 3 separate, complicated creatures all tied together, and her status as an actual deity, Auril easily takes the spot of 5th edition's most complicated enemy so far. Legendary monsters are literally the strongest, most powerful creatures in D&D, and they have special abilities to indicate that. Most legendary monsters are either gods or beings that are very close to becoming gods, so they're always incredibly strong. A legendary monster always has 2 traits, legendary resistances and legendary actions. A legendary monster has a certain amount of legendary resistances per day, which they can use to succeed any failed saving throw. This is really powerful, as some of the strongest spells and abilities in the game, like Banishment, require a creature to fail a saving throw to be useful. Legendary monsters also have a set amount of legendary actions, which they can use to act outside of their own turn. This is a very useful ability, not only because some legendary actions are just very powerful, but also because it lets legendary monsters adapt to the flow of a battle as it's happening and not just act on their own turn. So coming in at number 10 on this list, we have Ancient Dragons, but in particular the Ancient Gold Dragon. The Ancient Dragons are a particular class of dragons and can come in a bunch of different varieties, like white, red, copper, and gold. All of the Ancient Dragons are pretty deadly in their own right, as they all have high AC and hit points, but the Ancient Gold Dragon stands out among them because it has the highest AC at 22 and hit points of 546. While the Ancient Gold Dragon might not be able to deal as much damage as, say, an Ancient Red Dragon, the Ancient Gold Dragon has an incredibly powerful breath weapon. It's Weakening Breath, which forces everyone in a 90-foot cone to make a DC 24 strength saving throw, and if they fail, they have disadvantage on strength-based attacks and saving throws for a full minute. Plus, they're still dragons, so their basic attacks are still really powerful. So not only do Ancient Gold Dragons have really strong offensive options, they're also flexible and can defend themselves pretty well if they start getting overwhelmed by attacks. Add to the fact that they have 3 legendary resistances per day, which means they get to ignore 3 failed saves, and you have a pretty formidable boss monster. Another strength of all the Ancient Dragons is their lair actions, which are active while inside their lair. Since this list is focused on legendary creatures, not creatures with lair actions, it's safe to say that Ancient Dragons' lair actions are good. They give the dragon advantage on saving throws and attack rolls, for example, but also completely situational, as it depends whether or not you're fighting them in their lair or not. And a smart party can always find a way to lure a dragon outside of its lair. It just so happens that gold dragons are the most cowardly and cunning of the ancient dragons, according to the monster manual, so they're going to be the hardest to coax out of the lair, and you'll usually have to fight them with their lair actions active. If you play D&D and encountered an ancient dragon, you might be surprised it's only at number 10 on this list. But remember, the strongest legendary creatures are essentially just gods, so the fact that ancient dragons score so high in this list is pretty impressive in of itself. And at number 9, we have Niv-Mizzet, a unique legendary creature from Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica sourcebook. He's a gargantuan dragon and has an AC of 22 and 370 hit points. What's unique about Niv-Mizzet is that he's the only high challenge rating dragon that has spellcasting built into his stat block. He's a spellcaster first and a dragon second. That being said, he has all of the strengths of an ancient dragon, the high hit points, the high physical attacks, and the 80-foot fly speed. But Niv-Mizzet also has extra strong spell-based traits that really make him stand out. The only thing he's lacking is in his hit points, which are lower than most dragons, and the lair actions. But this extra spellcasting more than makes up for it. His trait, Locus of the Firemind, lets him maintain concentration on 2 spells at once. And with spells like Polymorph, Wall of Fire, a 9th level spell slot at his disposal, he can definitely put the trait to good use and deal heavy area of effect damage to a party. You might also think that Wall of Fire is okay, but not great, since it can only do fire damage. But Niv-Mizzet's other trait, Master Chemister, allows him to change any spell damage to the type of cold, fire, force, lightning, or thunder, which makes spells like Wall of Fire especially versatile. Another great thing about Niv-Mizzet is that, in addition to the 3 legendary resistances he gets per day, he also has the magic resistance trait, which gives him advantage on any saving throws against magical effects. When a legendary monster has this trait, it's generally pretty bad news, because it just makes it even harder for them to fail a saving throw because they already have advantage. And if they fail, they still have legendary resistances. Niv-Mizzet also has a pretty great legendary action he can make use of as well, Draco Genius, which lets him regain a spell slot of 3rd level or lower every round. Niv-Mizzet's 3rd level spells include spells like Slow and Counterspell, so it gives him a great option to use if he's not in range for any of his other attacks. Niv-Mizzet's spells and his more flexible legendary actions put him a little bit higher than the regular Ancient Dragons in power level, which lets him just about take up the number 9 spot on this list. And at number 8, we have Orcus, a demon lord that has been a staple of D&D adventures for a long time. Orcus is a huge fiend with an AC of 20 and 405 hit points. Similar to Niv-Mizzet and like many other demon monsters in D&D, Orcus has the magic resistance trait, which means his 3 legendary resistances per day are even more useful. Although the coolest thing about Orcus is definitely the item he carries with him, the Wand of Orcus. When he holds it, he can use the 9th level spell Power Word Kill 3 times per day, which is already pretty powerful. But he can also cast Conjure Dead once per day, which means he can conjure any generic undead creatures with a combined hit points of 500 or less. This means Orcus can summon multiple Demi-Liches and a Ghost Dragon, for example, all with one action. Summoning creatures in D&D is already pretty strong, but summoning entire boss monsters as minions is just on another level. The only bad thing about Orcus is really that if you manage to take the Wand of Orcus from him, he becomes a lot weaker. His AC goes down to 17 and he can't cast the Conjure Dead spell anymore. He's still strong, but he'd definitely be below Niv-Mizzet if it wasn't for the wand. And since the wand isn't permanently attached to him, it explains why he's only at number 8 on this list, even though it's such a strong item. And at number 7, we have another demon lord, Zariel, who is also the main antagonist of Descent into Avernus campaign. Zariel is a large fiend with an AC of 21 and 420 hit points. Being a fellow demon lord, Zariel is kind of on the same power level as Orcus. She also has the magic resistance trait, for example, and has 3 legendary resistances as well. But Zariel's AC isn't limited by her having a particular weapon like Orcus has with his Wand of Orcus. Her base AC is already 21, which is just way higher than Orcus without the wand. And she also has a bunch of powerful spells like Blade Barrier and Finger of Death at her disposal. Importantly, Zariel also has some pretty good legendary actions, with the best one probably being that, in between other characters' turns, she can cast Teleport 3 times every round, up to 120 feet in a different place. This means she's incredibly hard to pin down, and can easily get close to backline spellcasters or rogues without provoking attacks of opportunity. Zariel's other legendary action is Immolating Gaze, which is just 4d10 fire damage on a DC 26 wisdom save. She can only do this action once per round though, which makes it a bit less good. The main strength of Zariel is her maneuverability, which utilizes the flexibility of the legendary action mechanic really well. Not only that, but the fact that she's also the centerpiece of an entire campaign in 5e, namely Descent into Avernus, means that her lair actions in Avernus have been really fleshed out in 5e, which just makes her an even more compelling boss monster. If you're facing Zariel, you already know your DM has a wealth of inspiration to draw from, and it might not be the last time you see her. Other than that though, her damage is definitely strong, but she's just not as powerful as some of the higher spots on this list. And at number 6, we have Tromokratis, a gargantuan creature with an AC of 22 and 409 hit points. Tromokratis is a type of kraken, and was introduced first in the Mythic Odysseus of Theros book, so it's basically just a super buffed up version of a regular kraken. Tromokratis gets higher than either the demon lords on this list because of one simple reason: it has mythic actions. Now, mythic actions are another version of legendary actions, and they were introduced with the Mythic Odyssey of Theros book along with Tromokratis. A creature with mythic actions doesn't immediately have access to them though. Something needs to happen for them to be unlocked. Usually this means the creature with mythic action needs to reach 0 hit points, and when it does, it doesn't die. Instead, it enters its second phase of the fight, getting more health and finally gaining access to its mythic actions, which are basically just stronger versions of legendary actions the creature already had, and work the same way as legendary actions do. In Tromokratis' case, when it gets taken down to 0 health, it reveals the 4 hearts in its chest, each with an AC of 22 and 100 hit points, which the party has to then destroy to really take Tromokratis down. Basically, mythic actions are there to make boss fights even more crazy memorable, while providing a surprising challenge for players that think they have a monster beaten. When its mythic actions have been unlocked, Tromokratis can use them to either swallow a creature with its bite, or make 2 attacks that do a combined total of 64 bludgeoning damage and can knock a character prone or grapple them. If it needs to be defensive, Tromokratis can use its mythic action to gain +2 to AC for an entire round of combat, which is a really strong ability. Now, having a second health bar in mythic actions is already pretty good. It would definitely be enough to put Tromokratis at the number 6 spot on this list. But Tromokratis also has an upgraded version of the magic resistance trait, which is this trait, Spell Resistance Carapace. Similar to magic resistance, it gives Tromokratis advantage in saving throws against magic, but it also makes spell attacks against Tromokratis have disadvantage. The magic resistance trait is already really good when combined with legendary resistances, and Tromokratis' trait is just a better version of that. So it makes fighting it and taking Tromokratis down even harder. The only downside to Tromokratis is that during its second phase, it relies on the stats of its hearts and not its own stats, and the hearts don't actually have very good saving throws, with +0 to every saving throw. So once the party figures that out, even with the spell resistant carapace trait, the second phase of the fight isn't going to be that difficult for them. There are creatures with mythic actions that just have a better second phase than Tromokratis. Add to that, it's also quite slow on land, with a walking speed of only 13 feet, which means a smart party that's able to draw it out of the water can easily kite the boss around. Tromokratis is really only good at fighting in water, which makes it a lot less flexible than some of the higher spots on this list. And at number 5, we have Rak'Tolkesh, our first truly godlike creature from the Eberron setting. Rak'Tolkesh is a huge fiend with an armor class of 23, or 25 if it's being hit by a ranged attack, and 478 hit points. Just like the Demon Lords earlier in this list, Rak'Tolkesh has the magic resistance trait. Unlike Tromokratis, however, whose lowest saving throw is a +0, Rak'Tolkesh's lowest saving throw is a +4 for dexterity, and his highest is a +17 on strength. So getting him to fail a saving throw is almost impossible. Rak'Tolkesh is also called the Rage of War, a name he lives up to as there's probably no creature better at pure close quarter combats than him. He gets to make 4 weapon attacks per turn with a maximum range of 600 feet on his ranged weapons, and an average of 28 force damage on every melee attack. With a flying speed of 18 feet, he's probably never going to be out close combat range, and even if he is, the range on his range attacks means he can give even the slipperiest of parties a hard time. Rak'Tolkesh's damage is also increased even more by 2 of his traits, Whirlwind to Weapons and Deadly Critical. Deadly Critical essentially doubles Rak'Tolkesh's chance to get a critical hit, getting 1 on a 19 or a 20, and lets him roll his dice 3 times instead of twice, which basically just adds another 50% extra damage to his crits. Whirlwind of Weapons just means Rak'Tolkesh does 4d6 force damage to any creature within 10 feet of him. Combined with the fact that he can cast 3 different types of smites once per day, means Rak'Tolkesh can do a lot of damage with just a single attack. Just an example, if someone starts their turn within 10 feet of him, and he rolls a 19 on a Banishing Smite attack, that means they take 9d12 plus 9 force damage from the crit roll weapon, then another 15d10 force damage from the Banishing Smite. That's an average of 149 force damage on one of his 4 attacks. Unlike Tromokratis earlier, who only really had strong mythic actions, Rak'Tolkesh's best legendary action is also incredibly strong. While it does take all 3 of his legendary actions, he can use it to make everyone in a 60-foot area of him make an attack against a random creature, and if there's no creature in range, they make a ranged attack, throwing their weapon if necessary. So not only can he force you to attack all your allies outside of his turn, he also has one of the strongest abilities in the game, which is to disarm your character, and he can do that every round. The only things really stopping Rak'Tolkesh from being higher on this list is that most of his abilities just help him do more damage. He doesn't have many attacks that apply conditions, and his range attacks outside of it are a bit limited. If he had mythic actions in a second phase, Rak'Tolkesh might be in the top 3 in this list, though simply because all the damage he can put out, and the fact that most of it is force damage, which basically nothing has resistance to. Coming in number 4 on this list, we have Great Worms. The Great Worms are another class of dragons similar to the Ancient Dragons at the number 10 on this list. They were first introduced in Fizbane's Treasury of Dragons, and they're basically just an extremely strong, upgraded version of the Ancient Dragons. The stats of the Great Worms are all slightly different, but the strongest ones are Gargantuan Dragons, have 4 legendary resistances per day, with an AC of 22 and 565 hit points. Now, all of the Great Worms are pretty strong, regardless of their stats and their abilities, which are pretty much the same as the Ancient Dragons. They have bite, claw, and tail attacks as well as breath weapons, with the main difference between Great Worms and Ancient Dragons being that most of the Great Worms also have mythic actions in a second phase. So when they're brought to 0 hit points, they reset to 425 hit points, regain their legendary resistances, and recharge their breath weapons immediately. Even though Great Worms are quite similar to each other, the metallic Great Worms are probably still the strongest. And that's mainly for 2 reasons. First of all, the metallic Great Worms have an extra option for their breath weapon, which is Sapping Breath, a 300-foot cone breath weapon with a DC 25 saving throw, becoming unconscious for a full minute. Now, you do get to save again at the end of each of your turns, but making a creature unconscious on a DC 25 saving throw for even 1 turn is just really strong. Not only that, because the metallic Great Worm also has a unique mythic action, Shattering Roar, which costs 2 of their 3 legendary actions and is a 120-foot radius sphere centered on the Great Worm. If you're in the radius, you have to make a DC 26 Constitution saving throw or be incapacitated until the end of your next turn. Now, their breath weapon is already powerful, but it needs to be recharged, Shattering Roar, on the other hand, is an ability the Metallic Great Worm can use every round, and it has an incredibly high DC. Normally on strong creatures, an ability like Shattering Roar would be once or twice per day, so the fact that it can use it every round is just kinda broken. However, even though they're extremely versatile, and definitely more versatile than a lot of the other lower entries on this list, Great Worms still aren't as strong as the creatures in the top 3 of this list. If you or your DM run a Great Worms as spellcasters, like Niv-Mizzet at number 9 on this list, then they definitely make the top 3. As it stands though, they're sitting comfortably at number 4, which is still pretty good, considering it's higher than a literal god. And at number 3, we have Sol-Khatesh. Now, Sol-Khatesh is, bluntly put, a beast. For a long time, people considered her the strongest printed monster in 5e, which says a lot about the power level of the higher spots in this list. Sol-Khatesh is also from Eberron and is a large fiend with 22 AC, 475 hit points. What's even more impressive about Sol-Khatesh is that she makes it to number 3 spot on this list without even having a mythic action. That's just how strong her base kit is without any second phase. The main thing that makes Sol-Khatesh so strong is her once per day ability, Arcane Cataclysm. Arcane Cataclysm is one of the strongest abilities on any creature, because it essentially acts as an incredible offensive ability and an incredible defensive ability all in one. When she uses it, Sol-Khatesh conjures 3 orbs with a 40-foot radius anywhere within 1 mile that slam into the ground, and anyone in their area has to make a DC 26 dexterity saving throw or take 11d12 force damage, or half as much if they succeed. This wouldn't be so bad, especially because there's a good amount of ways to avoid the damage completely if you're a monk or a rogue who has evasion. But then, the 40-foot radius fields themselves also act as anti-magic fields, which means that no spells can be cast inside them, and any magical weapons become non-magical. Except Sol-Khatesh and her spells aren't affected by these fields at all. So Sol-Khatesh can just stand inside these 40-foot radius spheres and cast spells like Chain Lightning and Power Word Kill, as well as her basic 1d10 plus 10 force damage attacks with a 120-foot range, and you can't do anything to her. Even if you're a fighter where the Vorpal Sword gets in range of Sol-Khatesh, it won't have any of its magical properties because of the anti-magic field, so it does non-magical damage, which Sol-Khatesh is completely immune to anyway. Even if somehow you manage to make a spell attack or weapon attack against Sol-Khatesh or get out of her anti-magic field, she can cast Counterspell or Shield at will, which will let her cancel your spells or get +5 to her AC for a full round of combat. If that doesn't work, one of Sol-Khatesh's legendary actions lets her stop concentration on a spell immediately within 120 feet if that creature fails a DC 26 Wisdom save. Plus, she also still has magic resistance along with 3 legendary resistances per day. Even then, if you somehow manage to do damage to Sol-Khatesh, she can just teleport away, which she gets to use once per day as well. And you'll find it hard to counterspell her teleport if she's counterspelling your counterspell. The only real drawback Sol-Khatesh has is that even though she's powerful, her actual movement speed of 40 feet is quite slow. If you're not trying to defeat her and are just trying to run away, your party is probably going to survive the encounter, especially if you have mounts or movement speed buffs like haste. Sol-Khatesh is still definitely the strongest spellcaster monster in D&D, which makes her more than deserving of the number 3 spot on this list. And rumbling its way to number 2, we have the Tarrasque. The Tarrasque is a gargantuan creature with an AC of 25, 675 hit points, and is probably the most well-known original D&D monster. And some of you might be surprised that it's not at the top of this list. That's because, despite its reputation, the Tarrasque has one pretty enormous weakness that we'll get to in a bit. The Tarrasque is deadly, for sure. It's got a huge amount of hit points, and its beefiness of its health dwarfs basically any other statted D&D creature. Even gods like Sol-Khatesh can't stand up to the Tarrasque in terms of sheer defensive capabilities, which means it does truly live up to its reputation as the ultimate boss monster in D&D. Its main crazy ability is its trait Reflective Carapace. This says that if the Tarrasque is targeted by a magic missile spell, or any spell that requires a ranged attack roll, you roll a d6. On a 1 to 5, the Tarrasque is unaffected, and on a 6, the Tarrasque is still unaffected, but it bounces the spell back. This means that the Tarrasque is just completely unaffected by spell attacks, along with also having magic resistance and 3 legendary resistances. So if you want to do any damage to Tarrasque with spells, you're gonna have to do it through its legendary resistances, as well as its magic resistance, because you just can't use spell attacks at all. The Tarrasque can also take 6 actions on its turn, a DC 17 saving throw for a frightened condition, along with Bite, 2 claws, horns, and a tail attack, the weakest of which still does an average of 24 damage, along with being able to knock creatures prone or even swallow them. The Tarrasque's swallow action is definitely one of the most powerful abilities, especially because it can actually use a legendary action to swallow a creature outside of its turn. If you're swallowed by Tarrasque, you're going to be taking 16d6 acid damage every turn, and you can only escape if you deal more than 60 damage in one turn. Considering being swallowed also gives you the blinded and restrained condition, that's a pretty hard thing to accomplish. However, the main reason it's still at number 2 in this list is that, similar to Sulcatash, it has really low movement speed. Even though it can use legendary actions to move half its base speed is only 40 feet. This means that in a round, the Tarrasque can only move a total of 140 feet, and that's if it uses its action to dash. Even Tromokratus has the option of moving faster in water, but the Tarrasque doesn't have that out. For mobile parties, especially ones that create difficult terrain, it's actually quite easy to exceed the movement speed and kite a Tarrasque in an area that's large enough, so there won't be any problems in keeping it at bay. However, that doesn't change the fact that actually fighting the Tarrasque on its own terms is basically impossible, even if at the highest level of play. All in all, in a situation where the Tarrasque gets to fight like it wants to, it can dish out incredible amounts of damage. But it's possible to avoid those situations if you have a skilled party, which means it only takes number 2 spot on this list. And at the top spot on this list, we have both of the aspect dragons, the aspect of Tiamat and the aspect of Bahamut. Both of these creatures were introduced in Fizbane's Treasure Dragons, and are essentially manifestations of the old dragon gods, Tiamat and Bahamut. These two share a spot on this list because they're just that far removed from the other legendary monsters in terms of strength, and they both have similar stats. For this list though, we'll mainly be talking about the aspect of Tiamat, because the aspect of Bahamut is a bit more focused around healing and defense, which is going to make it harder to kill but less likely to put out a huge amount of damage, and so it's not quite as strong as the aspect of Tiamat. The aspect of Tiamat is a gargantuan dragon with an AC of 23 and 574 hit points. Because Tiamat is the god of the chromatic dragons, the aspect of Tiamat has all of the abilities of the Great Worms rolled into one. It can use any type of breath weapon, and also has mythic actions that unlock when it reaches 0 hit points. However, the aspect of Tiamat just does significantly more damage than any of the Great Worms, along with its breath weapon being able to choose what kind of damage it deals, with 300-foot range and a dexterity saving throw of DC 27. So any resistance a character might have to particular damage types are pretty much nullified. Similar to the Great Worms, the aspect of Tiamat also regains its legendary resistances when it falls to 0, as well as gaining another 500 hit points, and recharges its breath weapon to do even more damage. Except that, instead of 4 legendary resistances like the Great Worms, the aspect of Tiamat has 5 legendary resistances per day, which means that if you want to kill it in its second phase, you're going to have to go through a total of 10 legendary resistances, which is the most amount of any monster on this list. What's more, even though it may seem like the aspect of Tiamat has less health than something like a Tarrasque, because of its second phase, it actually has a total of 1,074 hit points, which is the highest hit point total in all of D&D. Also, the mythic actions it gets in the second phase are pretty insane, and are basically the strongest actions of that type in the game. Probably the best one is Hurl through Avernus, which forces one creature to make a DC 25 Charisma saving throw, and if they fail, they take 8d10 psychic damage and are banished to Avernus until the start of the aspect's next turn. In contrast to the Tarrasque as well, the aspect doesn't have limited movement at all, being able to fly 120 feet, which makes it harder to slow down with difficult terrain and almost impossible for an entire party to outrun. So unlike some of the other spots on this list, neither of the aspect dragons compromise on movement abilities for sheer power. They're versatile, quick, and powerful all at once. All in all, the aspects of the dragon gods, and the aspect of Tiamat in particular, are basically perfect D&D boss monsters, and are the best examples of what a truly legendary creature should feel like in D&D, which makes them more than deserving of the number 1 spot on this list. In this video, we're going to go over some of the toughest monsters your party might encounter in D&D. The creatures in this video will be ranked in comparison to the challenge rating of the creature that you're technically meant to fight them at. For example, a Banshee has a CR 4, meaning that she's meant to be taken on by a level 4 party of 4 players. Some creatures might give the party a lot more trouble at lower CR levels than other creatures at higher CR levels due to a lot of factors, such as resources and overall party strength, which is why you might see some lower level creatures on this list. With that out of the way, let's get started. And starting us off at number 10, we have the Tarrasque. The Tarrasque is a gargantuan monstrosity whose challenge rating is 30, the highest difficulty rating in the game. It sports 25 AC, 676 hit points, and a movement speed of 40 feet. It also has immunity to fire and poison damage, as well as bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons, along with having immunity to being charmed, frightened, paralyzed, and poisoned. The Tarrasque is set up to, basically, be an unstoppable titan of chaos that rampages through cities and causes destruction wherever it goes, with the ability to mostly be unaffected by magic due to having magic resistance to give it advantage in all saving throws against spells and magical effects, and through its reflective carapace making it immune to magic missiles, line spells, and ranged attack rolls from spells, where it can even reflect the magic back if the target rolls a 6 on a d6 with the ability in play, as well as having 3 uses of legendary resistance, which turn failed saving throws into automatic successful ones. The Tarrasque basically shuts down any spellcasting you want to be doing for the most part, unless you have a way to bypass its resistances. In terms of offense, the Tarrasque has a total of 5 attacks that can all be made after it uses its Frightful Presence, an ability which forces creatures of its choice within 120 feet to roll a Wisdom saving throw or become frightened for 1 minute, which can be hard to end once it's in effect since you have to repeat this saving throw at disadvantage if you're still within the Tarrasque line of sight. Luckily, each creature can only be frightened by this ability once every 24 hours, which isn't so bad to deal with. As for its attacks, they all hit pretty hard for its challenge rating, and each one of these attacks is a plus 19 to hit to boot. So, unless the Tarrasque rolls extremely poorly, your party will take some heavy knocks while fighting this monstrosity. And if that wasn't enough, its bite attack has the ability to grapple and restrain a creature and requires the target to make a DC 20 athletics or acrobatics check in order to break free. If they don't, then the Tarrasque has the option to swallow the target instead of making another bite attack, resulting in the creature taking not only the bite's damage, but also becoming blind and restrained as they're pulled into the belly of the beast, where they take an additional 16d6 acid damage at the start of each of the Tarrasque's turns. However, the swallowed creature can be freed if it deals 60 damage or more against the Tarrasque within a single turn, causing it to spit out all swallowed creatures into space within 10 feet of it if it fails a DC 20 Constitution saving throw at the end of that turn. And that's not even taking into account any of its legendary actions. Legendary actions are actions a creature can make at the end of another creature's turn that isn't itself. These actions can only be used one at a time, and all charges are replenished at the start of that creature's next turn. As for what the Tarrasque can do with 3 legendary actions it possesses, well, it can spend 1 action to make a single attack with its claw or tail, 1 action to move up to half of its speed, or it can spend 2 actions to make 1 bite attack or swallow if it already has someone grappled and restrained by its previous bite attack. This creature is a massive beast of a monster that can definitely give parties a run for their money if they don't go unprepared. Its high damage potential and ability to be almost completely immune to magic makes the Tarrasque a force to be reckoned with. However, there are 2 glaring weaknesses to this creature, with one of them being the severe lack of a ranged attack. While the Tarrasque can technically jump at a target that's high above it, there's not really much it can do against a fighter or ranger that's taken to the skies via winged boots or the fly spell and taking it out from range using bows. And while the Tarrasque sports a very strong defense against magic that doesn't require a melee spell attack roll, such as inflict wounds, against any martial base unit it will take a hefty amount of damage, since 25 AC at high levels is not exactly hard to meet. Even if the battle ends up taking place entirely on the ground, there's not a huge amount of danger if it ends up swallowing one of your party members, since meeting this 6 damage requirement to force it to spit them out is actually pretty feasible for most classes in general. But even if the swallowed creature can't make the damage check to get free, they'd still be dealing a good amount of damage to keep the fight moving forward. And at number 9, we have the Catoblepus. This CR5 creature possesses formidable attacks that can very easily down an unprepared party. Firstly, with its stench ability, creatures that start within 10 feet of the Catoblepus must succeed a DC 16 Constitution saving throw in order to avoid being poisoned and have their attack rolls and ability checks suffer disadvantage until the start of the creature's next turn. Its tail attack deals a decent amount of damage within a range of 10 feet, but the dangerous part about this attack is that it stuns on a failed DC 16 Constitution saving throw until the start of the Catoblepus' next turn, effectively skipping your turn for that round. But the real threat you want to be careful around is the Catoblepus' Death Ray ability, which deals a lot of damage and has a 30-foot range, and can basically instantly kill any party member at 5th level if they fail their Constitution saving throw against it. The ray itself deals 8d8 necrotic damage to a single creature, which can be manageable, but if a creature fails their Constitution saving throw by at least 5, they take a flat 64 necrotic damage, which can basically kill any party member at 5th level outside of maybe Barbarian with high amounts of hit points. Also, the Death Ray does exactly what it says in the name by actually killing their target if their hit points are reduced to 0 by the ability, making it very hard to recover from since your only way to resurrect dead party members at 5th level would be through the Revivify spell, which also has a cost of diamonds worth 300 gold and gets consumed whenever you cast it, which could make an encounter with a single Catoblepus pretty hard to recover from. The one saving grace is that its Death Ray ability uses the recharge mechanic, where it must roll a d6 at the start of each of its turns, and it must also roll a 5 or 6 on the d6 in order to be able to cast it again, which can give your party a few turns to finish off the Catoblepus or retreat if the situation doesn't seem to be going in your party's favor. However, even without access to its Death Ray, the Catoblepus can still be a real menace simply by having the ability to stun creatures with its tail and poison creatures that come near it. And a DC 16 Constitution saving throw is actually pretty high for 5th level parties, since very few classes have a lower focus on the Constitution stat in general, such as most spellcasters and ranged marshals. Luckily, the Catoblepus lacks the multi-attack feature, meaning that it can't stun a party member and follow it with a second attack with advantage, so it mostly serves as a way to prevent you from retreating or fighting back, which isn't as deadly as taking advantage of your ability to successfully make strength and dexterity saving throws due to being stunned, like the Empyrean might. And if you succeed against its stench ability, you are immune to its effects for 1 hour, which eliminates the problem altogether. Overall, not the worst monster you could encounter in the game, but for its CR level, it can be very deadly, and easily kill a party member that isn't prepared to fight it due to its insanely high damage potential via Death Ray, and its ability to just be a nuisance in general with its ability to stun unlikely creatures on hits. And at number 8, we have Flame Skull. This is a CR4 creature that can be extremely dangerous to even higher level parties due to all the things it can do. Firstly, the Flame Skull possesses a 40-foot fly speed and has the hover property, making it so you can't knock it out of the air. In terms of defense, however, not only does the Flame Skull resist lightning, necrotic, and piercing damage, which can make it tough for bow users and party members with inflict wounds to take down properly, it also has immunity to cold, fire, and poison damage, as well as immunity from being charmed, frightened, paralyzed, poisoned, or being knocked prone. And while cold and poison damage aren't incredibly common at lower levels, being immune to fire damage means that you can't damage a Flame Skull by the likes of the spells Firebolt or Scorching Ray. Even so, this isn't so terrible due to the Flame Skull's low number of hit points at 40, so having a spell like Shatter or Magic Missiles can still make quick work of the Flame Skull, which you're going to want to do because it has a lot more going for it besides the resistances and immunities. For example, the Flame Skull is one of, if not the earliest creature you can encounter with magic resistance. Granted an advantage against your Shatter or other spells and magical effects that force a saving throw, and it can regain all of its hit points in 1 hour after it's destroyed unless you take precautions to kill it for good, such as sprinkling holy water on their mains or using Dispel Magic or remove curse spells. But arguably, the most dangerous thing about Flame Skulls are their spells. Magic Missile gives it a way to guarantee damage on creatures, while Shield allows the Flame Skull to boost its 13 AC to a reasonable 18 AC as a reaction. Blur makes it hard for creatures to hit the Flame Skulls with attack spells, and Flaming Sphere can be a bit of an annoyance since it gives the Flame Skull a bonus action during its turns and deals extra fire damage to creatures. However, by far, the most dangerous spell is Fireball, with its 20-foot radius sphere and 8d6 damage. Fireball can deal a tremendous amount of damage to any creature it hits that fail the dexterity saving throw to attempt to only take half the damage. While the spell save DC for it is relatively low, it can deal an unexpected amount of damage or even down party members who were either low in hit points or were unlucky enough to fail their saving throw against the Fireball. To put this damage into perspective, the average player character would roughly have around 27 hit points, give or take at 4th level. Fireball deals 8d6 fire damage, or an average of around 28 damage, which can be truly devastating for most player characters that don't roll high for the hit points or outright resist fire damage. And the worst part about this is the fact that because the Flame Skull is immune to fire damage, it can cast Fireball even when it's inside the spell radius, since it would take no damage from it. So it would have no problem finding an optimal position to engulf your entire party in exploding flames with a point-blank Fireball if it wants to. Luckily, it can only cast the spell once a day, but that doesn't take away how deadly an early game creature with Fireball and magic resistance can be to a low-level party. And while not as deadly, let's not forget about its fire reaction, which it can fire 2 of for 3d6 fire damage each as a multi-attack option. While not as deadly, it does have a range of 30 feet, giving it the option to attack spellcasters that might be concentrated on something, or just attack from the air with its 40-foot fly speed. And at number 7, we have the Ancient Solar Dragon, a CR21 gargantuan dragon that lives inside a star's core or equivalent. It sports a relatively high amount of hit points and insane fly speed of 120 feet, as well as the hover trait and flyby, making it immune from being knocked out of flight and can't be opportunity attacked while flying out of enemies' reach. Its mind also cannot be read even through magical means, and doesn't need air to breathe. It also counts as a siege monster, meaning it deals double damage to objects and structures, such as spaceships that's trying to approach its lair. The Ancient Solar Dragon has 2 main attacks, a tail attack and a bite that it can use as part of its multi-attack option. The bite deals respectable piercing damage and some additional radiant damage, while the tail just does a lump sum of bludgeoning damage. The tail attack can also be used as a legendary action as well. As for its third action, the Ancient Solar Dragon possesses a photonic breath, where it can exhale a flashing mode of radiant energy that blossoms into a 40-foot radius sphere, centered on a point that it can see within a range of 240 feet of itself, dealing 12d10 radiant damage to creatures that fail a DC 23 Constitution saving throw, or half as much on a success. While the damage of this ability is relatively high, it does have to recharge first in order to be used again. Also, the Ancient Solar Dragon can spend 2 legendary actions to emit a magical light from itself in the 30-foot radius sphere, inflicting the blinded condition on every creature that fails the Constitution saving throw until the affected creature's turns. While these might not seem all that impressive, the real problem with fighting an Ancient Solar Dragon is the lair it resides in. As long as a creature with unprotected eyes enters or starts its turn within 10 miles of the dragon's lair, they are blinded. And any creature that enters or starts its turn inside the lair takes 24d10 radiant damage, which can easily end your journey to the center of the star prematurely. And with very few ways to actually make yourself immune to radiant damage, you're better off not even trying to go after an Ancient Solar Dragon in its home. Instead, you would have to lure it out or catch it while hunting for food away from its domain. Unfortunately, because the actual danger of the Ancient Solar Dragon is in its lair, the creature only takes number 7 on this list. Since, unlike some of the other creatures that will show up on this list, without its lair, the Ancient Solar Dragon is kind of weaker than other dragons by comparison due to their wider range of attacks and spells, granting them more versatility. However, with its layer taken into account, the Ancient Solar Dragon does definitely win in terms of raw damage output. Plus, this is a dragon that was born and lives inside a star, which is really neat for Dungeons & Dragons. And burrowing into number 6, we have the Purple Worm, a CR-15 gargantuan monstrosity that can tunnel through solid rock and deal a frightening amount of acid and poison damage to unsuspecting creatures that encounter it. It has a burrow speed of 30 feet, and half of that when burrowing through solid rock while leaving a 10-foot diameter tunnel in its wake. It also possesses blind sight and tremor sense, making it hard to hide from or surprise since it can detect movement and vibrations beneath the Earth's surface. As for what it can do in combat, the Purple Worm has 2 options using its multi-attack feature, a bite attack and a tail stinger. The tail stinger has a range of 10 feet and is a melee attack that deals 3d6 plus 9 piercing damage, and additional 12d6 poison damage if the creature fails a constitution saving throw. However, a creature that succeeds their saving throw will take half of that poison damage. Meanwhile, its bite attack does a bit more than just raw damage to creatures it hits. In addition to dealing 3d8 plus 9 piercing damage, a creature of category size large or smaller must succeed a DC 19 dexterity saving throw or be swallowed whole by the worm. While swallowed, the creature is blinded and restrained and has total cover against attacks and other effects outside the worm. But the most important part of this is the fact that a swallowed creature takes 66 acid damage at the start of each of the worm's turns. Just like other monsters that can swallow creatures, such as the Tarrasque, if the swallowed creature deals enough damage while inside of it, in this case 30 damage, then the Purple Worm will regurgitate all swallowed creatures it might have inside of it, causing said creatures to fall prone upon landing onto a space within 10 feet of it. While the overall damage of the Purple Worm's swallow feature might not seem any more dangerous than the other creatures of its CR level, the true danger is the fact that the Purple Worm can burrow, meaning that it has the ability to swallow one of your party members and just retreat underground while it digests its meal. And unlike the Tarrasque, the Purple Worm doesn't need a turn to set up a swallow. It just happens on hit. Nor can you just fly and attack the worm from range until it dies, since it can just burrow its way underground. The creature effectively forces your party member to fight it on its own terms, since you have to chase it through the tunnels it leaves behind if you want to catch up to it, and is one of the main reasons why this creature takes number 6 spot on this list. However, without running the Purple Worm as a sort of hit and run type encounter, it would most assuredly lose in a straight up fight against a decently prepared party at level 15, which holds it back from being any higher on this list. And at number 5, we have the Aboleth. This is a large aberration with a CR of 10 that can basically act as an underwater boss, and can be extremely rough to deal with due to all of the ways it can mess with your party. Firstly, the Aboleth has 3 traits it has access to. The first is it possesses its amphibious trait, which basically just means that it can breathe both air and water. While the second trait is it has the ability to probe the mind of a creature it communicates telepathically with, and learns that creature's greatest desires. But among these is a more dangerous trait to worry about called Mucus Cloud, which is a transformative mucus that surrounds the Aboleth while it's underwater. Whenever it hits a creature within 5 feet of it with a melee attack, the creature has to succeed a DC 14 Constitution saving throw, or else it'll be diseased for 1d4 hours. As for what the disease does, it makes it so that whatever the creature hits can only breathe underwater, which can be troublesome to deal with, but not lethal by any means, if no one in your party has a way of curing the disease after the battle using something like Lesser Restoration. On its turn, the Aboleth can make 3 attacks using its tentacles as its multi-attack option. The tentacle has a reach of 10 feet and deals 2d6 plus 5 bludgeoning damage whenever it hits, and forces the creature to make a DC 14 Constitution saving throw or become afflicted with a different type of disease. However, unlike the previous disease, this one doesn't become active until 1 minute passes, which is usually after the battle would end, making it a very real possibility that this disease goes unnoticed until it starts to take effect. As for what it does, basically it makes your skin translucent and slimy while also making it so you can't regain any hit points unless you're underwater. Speaking of being underwater, if you happen to be outside of a body of water while you have the disease, you'll take 1d12 acid damage every 10 minutes unless you apply some kind of moisture to your skin before the 10 minutes have passed. But the real kicker of the disease is the fact that it is kind of hard to cure because unlike most diseases, this one can only be cured by the specific 6th level spell, Heal. Or a spell that cures disease cast at 6th level or higher, and there's no stated duration for how long the disease lasts. So, a normal Lesser Restoration would not cure this disease unless you use a 6th level spell slot to cast it. This is so troublesome because at 10th level, no one in your party is going to have 6th level spell slots, so you would either have to backtrack and find someone who can help you cure the disease, or take on the Aboleth at a higher level where you do have the means to cure the disease. But if you have something such as Create or Destroy Water or a few buckets, you can at least mitigate the acid damage until you find a way to have the disease cured. This is mostly an inconvenience than anything else, and isn't even the most dangerous thing the Aboleth can do, either. Along with a tail attack that deals 3d6 plus 5 bludgeoning damage, this is mostly reserved for its legendary action, it can also use an action to attempt to enslave a creature within 30 feet of it 3 times a day. The target creature must succeed a DC 14 Wisdom saving throw or become charmed by the Aboleth until the Aboleth either dies, or happens to find itself on a different plane than the enslaved target. While the creature is charmed, it can't take reactions, and the aboleth can communicate with them telepathically over any distance. And if the charmed creature takes any damage, they can repeat this saving throw and try to end the effect, but can also attempt to end the effect once per day if at least 1 mile away from the aboleth. Since Enslave allows the aboleth to communicate telepathically with the charmed target, it works well with its probing telepathy trait, which can allow the aboleth to tempt the charmed creature with its greatest desires and potentially turn the charmed creature against the party, or have an NPC thrall that does its bidding. Along with all of this, the aboleth also has 3 legendary actions it can do. It can use Detect, which just lets it make a perception check. It can make a single tail attack against a creature, but the most important of these legendary actions is Psychic Drain, which costs 2 actions and allows it to deal 3d6 psychic damage to one creature if it's charmed, and heal itself for the amount of damage done to the creature, which can serve to prolong the fight if the aboleth manages to accumulate multiple thralls. On top of this, the aboleth also has access to 3 different layer actions that can go into effect on initiative count 20. The first layer action we're going to talk about is one that allows the aboleth to cast the Phantasm Force spell, without any components, on any number of creatures it can see within 60 feet of it. In a nutshell, this is a 2nd level concentration spell that lasts for up to 1 minute, and basically roots an illusion into the target creature's mind and can cause a minor amount of psychic damage per round during the time the creature is affected. It requires an intelligence saving throw to avoid being affected, and an investigation check using a reaction to end the spell early if you do manage to become affected by the spell. The good news about this layer action is that the aboleth does need to maintain concentration in order to keep the spell active. While concentrating on Phantasmal Force, the aboleth can't use any other layer actions, which might actually be a small upside in the favor of the party. Furthermore, if the creature breaks out of the Phantasmal Force or otherwise succeeds in being affected by it in the first place, then that creature is immune to layer actions for 24 hours unless the creature chooses to be affected, such as a creature that's been charmed by the aboleth's Enslave action. The next layer action the aboleth can do is conjure pools of water that surge outward within 90 feet of itself and will cause creatures within 20 feet of the pool to be knocked prone if they fail a DC 14 strength saving throw, as well as being pulled up to 20 feet into the water. This can be an annoying bit of crowd control to your party if you rely on movement a lot, since standing back up from being prone costs half your movement. The upside, however, is that it doesn't deal damage and can't be used multiple times in a row. It must first use a different layer action altogether. However, this next layer action does actually do damage by turning any body of water the aboleth can see within 90 feet of it into a conduit for its own rage, forcing creatures in those bodies of waters to make DC 14 wisdom saving throws or take 2d6 psychic damage. And just like the previous layer action, this one can't be used again until another layer action is used. So, along with being able to charm creatures using his Enslave ability, manipulate them through their deepest desires, and actively deal damage to those charmed creatures while also being able to inflict diseases and heal itself, the aboleth is definitely a force to be reckoned with for a CR10 creature. It might even seem a bit overwhelming at first if it's your first time facing one. And if that wasn't bad enough, there are the regional effects related to the aboleth that need to be discussed as well. So, there are 3 regional effects that occur within 1 mile of the aboleth's lair. The first is nice and simple, but annoying. Underground surfaces are slimy, wet, and considered difficult terrain, which can make it hard to traverse through the aboleth's lair due to your hindered mobility. The second is that any water source is contaminated, which causes enemies of the aboleth to vomit within a few minutes of drinking water from it. The third and final regional effect is that the aboleth can use its action in order to create an illusionary image of itself within 1 mile of its lair. And there are 2 places this copy can appear in: a place it's seen before, or a location a creature charmed by the aboleth is able to see. The image lasts as long as the aboleth maintains concentration and allows the aboleth to basically communicate with its charmed thralls from a greater distance. As you can see, there is a lot going for the aboleth in terms of all the things it can do for a CR10 creature. It has ways to charm enemies, drain those charmed enemies, and even has legendary actions, layer actions, and can just be overall a nuisance. And while you might typically run the aboleth with its spawns to make the fight more interesting, the aboleth is still able to hold its own since it's also a water boss, which can be really tough to deal with due to the fact that the rules for underwater combat is a bit convoluted and comes with its own problems. So you'd be better off trying to find a way to lure the aboleth out or fight over the water in some way, which definitely helps escalate the aboleth to the number 5 spot on this list. But not any higher, since there are other creatures that can sustain themselves even better and are even more deadly than the aboleth. And at number 4, we have the Elder Brain. This large aberration is a CR14 creature that's considered the ultimate expression of Mind Flayer domination, able to author the thoughts and dreams amongst the canvases of creatures' minds. The Elder Brain acts as a central communication hub for Mind Flayer colonies, interconnecting the minds of all the Mind Flayers therein and creating a hive mind. The Mind Flayer minions it controls help protect and nourish the Elder Brain, but it isn't uncommon to encounter one of its own, especially if all of the Mind Flayers in its lair are all killed beforehand. As for what the Elder Brain can do, firstly, the brain is aware of all creatures within 5 miles of it whose intelligence score is 4 or higher through the creature sense trait it possesses. This trait also allows the brain to know the exact distance and direction of each creature while also knowing each one's intelligence score and nothing else. You can avoid this feature by magically protecting yourself through the use of something like Mind Blink or non-detection spells. which are spells that typically prevent enemies from probing your thoughts or detect you through the use of magical scrying sensors. The Elder Brain also comes with magic resistance, granted an advantage in all saving throws against spells and other magical events. And even if you do manage to get a spell through, it also sports legendary resistances 3 times per day, turning any of those failed saving throws into successful ones. The Brain can also initiate and maintain telepathic conversations with up to 10 creatures at a time within 5 miles of itself, while also allowing connected creatures to hear each other while communicating in this way. Combat-wise, the Elder Brain sports a formidable kit that actually makes it a challenging encounter even when it's on its own. It has a tentacle attack that has a range of 30 feet and deals 4d8 plus 2 bludgeoning damage whenever it hits, and grapples the creature if it's a category size of huge or smaller, taking an additional 1d8 plus 5 psychic damage at the start of each of the creature's turn, until the grapple ends by succeeding a strength or dexterity check in order to escape the grapple, or using a spell or ability which automatically breaks you out of it, such as teleportation. In addition to all of this, the Elder Brain can have up to 4 targets grappled, which can make the combat a bit dicey but not detrimental. The Elder Brain also has the signature move for Mind Flayers called Mind Blast, that does 5d10 plus 5 psychic damage to creatures of its choice within 60 feet of it, and stuns them for 1 minute, unless they succeed an intelligence saving throw in order to only take half the amount of psychic damage and not be stunned. And any stunned creature may repeat the saving throw at the end of each of their turns to try and end the effect early. This is especially dangerous since intelligence tends to be a neglected stat by most adventurers that don't actively make use of it, such as wizards or artificers, which can make Mind Blast incredibly difficult to avoid without the help from something like a paladin's aura protection feature, which allows themselves and allies within 10 feet to add the paladin's charisma modifier to saving throws that they make. The Elder Brain also has a few spells it can cast without using any spell components that aren't necessarily meant for combat. At will, it can cast Detect Thoughts and Try and Read Minds, and Levitate to allow it or other creatures to float. And 3 times a day, it can cast Modify Memory in order to change an event that a creature has memory of by either erasing it, or modifying how it remembers that memory, or just as a way to extract the memory or an event by having the creature recall the event in perfect detail. All of which have uses, but also has limitations as a 5th level spell. At base level, Modify Memory only allows the caster to affect a memory of the past 24 hours and has lasted no more than 10 minutes. However, it can be performed multiple times in the same creature, so it might be able to deal a lot more permanent damage to a creature's memory by having certain events completely wiped from their mind, such as an encounter with the Mind Flare or the Elder Brain itself to keep its location concealed, or plant false directions to its lair to misdirect anyone who might try to find it. And once a day, the Elder Brain can also cast Dominate Monster, which can be used to turn party members against each other, and it can cast Plane Shift to escape to another plane of existence, but can only cast it on itself. This can make it really hard to actually take down an Elder Brain if it gets desperate enough to attempt an escape, allowing it to live another day and rebuild its layers somewhere else. And as the release of Mordenkainen's Presence, Monsters in the Multiverse sourcebook, some of the Elder Brain's actions were converted into actual bonus actions that it can use instead, allowing it to have even more options during combat. The first of these abilities is Psychic Link, which allows the Elder Brain to target one incapacitated creature within range of its creature sense trait and establish a psychic link, which the Elder Brain can then use to perceive things through the creature's senses. Up to 10 psychic links can be maintained at a time, and the Elder Brain can terminate the link at any time, but the affected creature may attempt to break the link themselves by successfully making a DC 18 charisma saving throw, taking 3d6 psychic damage when they succeed. The link also ends when the affected creature is more than 5 miles away from the Elder Brain. And since being afflicted with the stun condition also inflicts the incapacitated condition, the Elder Brain can basically follow it with Psychic Link after a successful Mind Blast, which can potentially deal a bit more damage if the affected creature tries to break the link themselves. Something they might want to do because the Elder Brain's other bonus action, Sense Thoughts, which grants the brain insights on the link's creature's emotional state and their worries, loves, hates, and other foremost thoughts that it can take advantage of. And then we get to the Elder Brain's legendary actions. It has 3 of them and has 4 options it can choose from. The first one is called Break Concentration, which targets a creature within 120 feet, instantly breaking a creature's concentration of its spell it has cast and dealing 1d4 psychic damage per spell level. So if your wizard is concentrating on a polymorph spell, which is a 4th level spell that turns a creature into a beast for as long as you concentrate on the spell, allowing you to pull off some wacky things like turning your fighter into Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Elder Brain can just choose to end the wizard's concentration on that spell and deal a total of 44 psychic damage to them as a result. The second thing the Elder Brain can do is use Psychic Pulse, which targets one creature within 120 feet of itself that has a psychic link with it and resonates a pulse of psychic energy from it that deals 3d6 psychic damage to the linked creature and any enemies of the Elder Brain within 30 feet of the target. The next legendary action the Elder Brain has access to is its ability to completely sever a psychic link it has on a target within 120 feet of itself. When this happens, the creature that had the link will now have disadvantage in all ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws until the end of the creature's next turn. Lastly, at the cost of 2 legendary actions, the Elder Brain can make a single tentacle attack. The Elder Brain also comes with 3 different layer actions that can occur on an initiative count of 20. Force Wall allows the Elder Brain to cast a Wall of Force spell, allowing it to isolate creatures within its lair during combat in order to minimize the amount of damage it might take, or to separate charmed or stunned creatures from their allies while it uses its other actions to whittle them down with psychic damage. Psionic Anchor allows the Elder Brain to target one creature it can sense within 120 feet of it and reduce that target's movement speed to 0 if they fail a Charisma save. While anchored, the affected creature also can't move by teleporting, meaning spells like Misty Step or Dimension Door can't be used while the creature is affected by this lair action. And since there's no duration for this action, the only way for a creature to break free of being anchored is by repeating their Charisma saving throw at the end of each of their turns. Psychic Inspiration basically grants one friendly creature the Elder Brain can sense within 120 feet of itself advantage on one attack roll, ability check, or saving throw it makes before the end of its next turn. There's also the 3 regional effects that occur within 5 miles of the Elder Brain. The first effect, Paranoia, causes creatures to feel as though they're being followed, even if they're not. The second is Psychic Whispers, which causes creatures psychically linked to the Elder Brain to hear whispers in the deepest regions of their mind that are incomprehensible. And Telepathic Eavesdropping allows the Elder Brain to be able to overhear any telepathic conversation within its region. When this happens, the creature that initiated the telepathic conversation must make a Wisdom saving throw in order to determine whether or not someone is eavesdropping, but won't know any information outside of that. Overall, the Elder Brain is a formidable opponent for a CR14 creature, and a strong boss fight that can chip away at a party's health in multiple ways. It also sports a very unconventional way of dealing with intruders by attempting to form psychic links with them and messing with party in various ways using his mind abilities. Bosses that mess with the minds of the party to the extent the Elder Brain does are few and far between, so when it happens, you're almost completely caught off guard. And when you mix this with the fact that it also has the following: strong abilities that target the intelligence stat, the most neglected stat in the game in terms of character building, the ability to deal almost strictly psychic damage, a rare enough damage type with few ways to actually resist, the ability to stun creatures in AoE multiple times in combat if it's lucky with a recharge Mind Blast, a way to just break concentration spells your spellcasters might be trying to maintain, and overall good defense through the use of its magic resistance trait, you're dealing with a force to be reckoned with, and regardless of whether or not it's fighting on its own or with the minions, which is why the Elder Brain takes number 4 spot on this list. It does have one glaring weakness compared to the rest of what it's going for, which is its low AC of 10, meaning almost any normal attacks will hit. And with its movement speed of 5 feet, it's not going to be going anywhere unless it uses Levitate spell to get away from melee attackers. And it's this weakness that keeps the Elder Brain from taking a higher spot on this list. And at number 3, we have the Kraken. This is a gargantuan CR23 monstrosity that possesses some of the deadliest attacks in the game, while being extremely hard to fight due to being another water creature like the Aboleth. It has damage immunity from lightning damage, and damage from non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and cannot be frightened or paralyzed. It's amphibious and can breathe in air as well as in water. It ignores difficult terrain and magical effects that restrain or restrict its movement speed, as well as has the ability to spend 5 feet of movement to escape a non-magical restraint or being grappled. It also is considered a siege monster, meaning that fighting one out in the sea is an incredibly dangerous endeavor since it will deal double damage to your ship. It possesses a total of 4 actions, but you can make 3 attacks using its tentacles with its multi-attack feature, but can replace any of these with the use of its fling action, which we'll be going over shortly. It does possess a bite attack that can swallow a creature in a similar manner to the purple worm can as part of the attack, but requires at least 50 damage to be dealt to it by the swallowed creature to escape. Attacks made with the Kraken's tentacles have a reach of 30 feet while also grappling and restraining creatures until it can break free by succeeding athletics or acrobatics check. Along with this, the Kraken can fling a creature that it has grappled, throwing them up to 60 feet in a random direction and knocking them prone. This doesn't deal damage on its own, rather the creature takes damage based on how many feet it travels before striking a solid object after being thrown, which is 1d6 for every 10 feet they've been flung. And if the flung creature is thrown at another creature, both take the same amount of damage and are knocked prone if one being hit fails a dexterity saving throw. This action is especially notable because it means the Kraken can just use its tentacle to grab someone and then fling them into the ocean the same turn before the grappled creature even gets a chance to escape on their own, which will lead into an even worse situation due to its layer actions that we'll go over later. And lastly, in terms of the Kraken's actions, the Kraken can create 3 bolts of lightning that can strike targets it can see within 120 feet of it, and deal 4d10 lightning damage if the creature it's trying to hit fails a dex save. And since his ability doesn't specify that it has to be on different targets, the Kraken could strike the same target with it 3 times if it wanted to. It can also use Lightning Storm by spending 2 of its 3 legendary actions as well, or it could spend 1 legendary action to make a tentacle attack or fling a grappled creature if it has a hold of one. But for the cost of 3 legendary actions, it can dispel an ink cloud in a 60-foot radius while it's underwater, creating a heavily obscured area that effectively blinds creatures while inside of it, except for the Kraken itself. Additionally, any creature except the Kraken that ends its turn within the cloud will take 3d10 poison damage if they fail a con save. The good news is that the cloud is temporary, disappearing at the end of the Kraken's next turn, or dispersing if a strong current blows it away. For its layer actions, it has 3 that can occur on initiative count 20. The first layer action creates a strong current that can push creatures up to 60 feet away from the Kraken if they fail a strength save, but will still be pushed 10 feet away even if they succeed. The second layer action that can happen is will make creatures in the water that are within 60 feet of the Kraken have vulnerability to lightning damage until initiative count 20 of the next round, which makes its ability to fling creatures into the water and using Lightning Storm as a legendary action as an extremely dangerous combination of attacks that can potentially one-shot players, especially since all this can happen within 1 round of combat. And while this next layer action can't benefit from making creatures vulnerable to lightning, it can still shock creatures in the water by electrifying the sea within 120 feet of itself, forcing creatures to take 3d6 lightning damage upon failing a con save. On top of all this, there are 3 additional regional effects that take place while the Kraken is alive, all of which occur within 6 miles of the lair. It can control weather, similar to the control weather spell. Water elementals will coalesce, but are restricted to living in the water while also having a charisma and intelligence score of 1. And all aquatic creatures that have an intelligence score of 2 or lower are charmed by the Kraken and will aggressively attack intruders in the area. Overall, the Kraken is a formidable foe which sports a plethora of deadly attacks, and is a solid contender for being the most powerful creature in the game, which is why it sits at number 3 on this list. It possesses a lot of deadly combinations of attacks, and because it lives underwater, can be extremely hard to hit if it wants to be, similar to how the purple worm can just escape underground after swallowing its prey. But unlike the purple worm, in a straight fight, the Kraken is still powerful enough to cause heavy casualties to your party and ship, even if you aren't prepared for the encounter. The only problem with the Kraken is that it lacks legendary saves for a high CR creature, which can make it a breeze to counter if you have high enough level spellcasters in your party. And at number 2, we have the Gelatinous Cube, a CR2 large ooze that can deal lethal damage to creatures at the same level if they're not careful. And while this creature might not seem like much at first glance, especially compared to the Tarrasque and Kraken on this list, the Gelatinous Cube does have a few things going for it if we're considering a party of level 2 adventurers. For starters, it possesses blind sight at a range of 60 feet, making it difficult to hide from since they can always know your location, but for only as long as you're within its range. Beyond that, the Gelatinous Cube is blind and will not be able to perceive anyone beyond that range. The cube itself is also transparent and can't be seen easily unless a creature successfully makes a DC 15 perception check to spot a cube that hasn't moved or attacked yet. Additionally, if a creature that's aware of the cube tries to enter the cube space, they'll be surprised by the cube, which basically means you can't move or take actions on your first turn of combat, including reactions until the end of your turn in initiative. And if the Gelatinous Cube ever moves into the same space as a creature occupies, and that creature is a large or small creature, then the creature will need to make a DC 12 strength saving throw or else they'll be engulfed inside the cube, and will immediately start taking acid damage. While engulfed, the creature is restrained and has total cover, but can be seen inside of it. Another creature can attempt to free their target ally by succeeding a strength check, but will take 3d6 acid damage regardless of whether they succeed or fail. Meaning the creature stuck inside the cube will take 3d6 acid damage upon being engulfed, and 66 acid damage at the start of the cube's turn. The trapped creature may also make a DC 12 strength check in order to try to break free from its jelly prison. For a CR2 creature, taking a guaranteed 3d6 acid damage before you can even attempt to escape from inside a Gelatinous Cube, followed by another 66 acid damage if you fail to escape, is pretty much enough to bring any level 2 adventurer to 0 hit points. To put this damage into perspective, the average adventurer usually has around 17 hit points, give or take, at level 2. So if you get caught by surprise and therefore can't take any actions on your turn, and get stuck inside Gelatinous Cube, you will first take an average of 10 acid damage, which will then be followed by an average of 21 damage at the start of the cube's next turn, which is just way too much damage for low-level parties to handle all at once. And a creature has to take 10 acid damage on average just to even attempt to rescue a trapped ally. And since the cube can hold up to 4 medium-sized creatures, this means it could engulf your entire party if you aren't careful. However, there are some weaknesses the Gelatinous Cube has that can make it easier to deal with. Firstly, it only has 15 feet of movement, meaning that it must use its action to dash towards a creature to keep pace with them, as most creatures have 30 feet of movement or higher by default, barring a few exceptions. So as long as you keep on the move, the cube won't be able to catch up very easily. But because of this low movement and the fact that the cube is transparent while it's not moving or attacking, most Gelatinous Cubes would wait until something bumps into it on accident, choosing to rely on its hard-to-see status to try and take things by surprise. Normally, however, Gelatinous Cubes act as giant Roombas that scour dungeons, keeping them clean and dissolving soft organic matter while leaving bones and the like undissolved. And it might be easier to spot a cube that's been well fed due to all the flesh that's yet to dissolve. So if you find a dungeon that is particularly clean, that might be the first sign of there being a Gelatinous Cube in the area, which can make encounters a little easier since you can be more cautious of your surroundings. And while the cube has a respectable amount of hit points at 84, Gelatinous Cube also has an AC of 6, meaning almost any attack will be able to hit it unless you roll a natural 1. So if your party doesn't want to risk taking a lot of acid damage to free a trapped ally, they can go all in with their strongest abilities to take down the cube pretty reliably. But due to the fact that Gelatinous Cube can very easily down opponents by doing so much damage as well as sneaking up on them, and due to the fact that by level 2, you're not going to have as many tools to deal with one, unlike most other creatures at higher levels where your parties are effectively gods at level 20, this creature deserves the number 2 spot when you take into account the level it's meant to be fought at. And finally, at number 1, we have Orcus, which is a huge CR26 fiend and the Demon Prince of Undeath, also known as the Bloodlord. In short, he is basically the strongest necromancer you can fight in the game, as he's able to control undead to the highest degree in a variety of different ways. For starters, Orcus can cast the Animate Dead spell anytime he wants to, and can cast Create Undead spell 3 times a day. He can choose what level the spells are cast at, and the creatures created by these spells are under his control forever, meaning he doesn't have to refresh his control over these undead like he normally would. He also just ignores the nighttime restriction that Create Undead has, allowing him to use it at any time of the day that he pleases. While he technically can't really use these spells while in combat due to their 1-minute cast times, he can still use these spells to passively build up his undead army from the fresh kills he or his minions make. He possesses the powerful Wand of Orcus, which is a magic item that counts as a +3 mace, and deals 2d12 bonus necrotic damage whenever it hits, and it has a whole lot of effects as both a magic item and as an item being held by Orcus himself. But before we talk about all the extra effects the wand can do, let's first go over what Orcus himself can do. Orcus can make up to 3 of these attacks in a turn using his multi-attack feature, making any combination of his tail attack, necrotic bolt attack, or his Wand of Orcus attack. Both his wand and tail have a 10 feet reach, but the damage of the wand is 3d8 plus 11 bludgeoning damage, followed by the aforementioned 2d12 necrotic, while his tail deals 3d8 plus 8 force damage and 2d8 poison damage sprinkled in. His necrotic bolt attack, however, is his ranged option, which sports 120 foot range and deals 5d8 plus 7 necrotic damage to a target it hits. Normally, Orcus only has 3 options when it comes to spellcasting. At will, he can freely cast Detect Magic. 3 times per day, he can Power Word Kill, cast Dispel Magic, and once per day, he can use Time Stop. Time Stop and Dispel Magic are the most important of the 3 spells he can cast, as Time Stop allows him to set up a deadly attack, while Dispel Magic can get rid of important buffs your party might have, such as haste. However, a lot changes while Orcus wields the Wand of Orcus. Firstly, his AC is set to 20, up from his original 17, making him a bit harder to hit. Couple that with his 405 hit points and resistance to cold, fire, and lightning, and innate immunity to necrotic, poison, and non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and you're looking at quite a beefy target. And remember how Animate Dead is supposed to have a 1-minute cast time, making it so he can't technically use the spell in combat? This changes while he's holding the wand, which allows him to now cast Animate Dead as an action, which can be extremely dangerous to your party, as any dead party member can now be a target for his Animate Dead spell. However, this is probably still more useful as an out-of-combat feature, since it still allows Orcus to animate dead bodies very quickly, and because there's already another effect that can technically bring back dead party members from the dead, which we'll be covering soon. Along with this buff to Animate Dead, Orcus also gains access to the Blight spell, which can be used freely as his 4th level single target spell that deals 8d8 necrotic damage on a failed Constitution saving throw and half as much on a success, along with Speak with Dead, which lets Orcus ask 5 questions to a corpse and receive 5 answers that are usually vague or cryptic. The wand also comes with 7 charges that can be expended by Orcus to cast very powerful spells. For 1 charge each, Orcus can cast either Circle of Death, which is a fireball that deals necrotic damage instead of fire, and Finger of Death, a deadly single target spell that deals heavy necrotic damage if you fail a con save, which amounts to 7d8 plus 30 necrotic damage. But even more dangerous is what Orcus can do by expending 2 charges of his wand, Power Word Kill. This is a 9th level spell that kills a creature within range that has 100 hit points or fewer. It doesn't deal damage, nor does it allow for any death saves, you just die if you're hit by it. Normally, most creatures, including players, would only be able to cast a spell like this once a day. Orcus, meanwhile, gets to cast Power Word Kill 3 times a day at most, if he doesn't use too much of anything else the wand lets him do. And the final action Orcus can take while holding the wand allows him to conjure undead once a day, which conjures undead creatures whose combined hit points do not exceed 500 in occupied spaces within 300 feet of Orcus and remaining indefinitely under Orcus's command. This means that any undead creature could potentially appear in your fight against Orcus. This ability might even be the most powerful ability a creature could have in the entire game, simply because of the amount of action economy you can get out of it. For example, a normal skeleton has 13 hit points. With a single action, this allows Orcus to summon 38 skeletons, leaving 6 hit points left over for something like 3 crawling claws, that all have 2 hit points each. While this might not seem that bad, let's take into consideration other potential creatures that Orcus could conjure with his ability. The Nightwalker is a very powerful undead creature that has 337 hit points, and comes with 2 very annoying capabilities that you wouldn't want to encounter while fighting Orcus, such as its Annihilating Aura that can deal 66 necrotic damage to creatures that start the turn within 30 feet of it if they fail a con save. It can also reduce maximum hit points of players hit with its enervating focus, which can be extremely scary when you know you can't heal above 100 hit points anymore, making you permanently a target for Orcus' power word kill. And any creature the Nightwalker kills can't be revived unless it's through the Wish spell. It can also use its Finger of Doom ability to frighten and paralyze the creature, making it more vulnerable to follow-up attacks. And with 163 hit points left over to spend, Orcus can also summon a Lich alongside the Nightwalker, which has 135 hit points and has a lot of different spells it can cast to ruin your day, including Disintegrate, a 6th level spell that deals a huge 10d6 plus 40 force damage upon a failed dex save, as well as, of course, power word kill. Or maybe Orcus just wants to spend 3 Liches at once instead of a Nightwalker. He can also summon up 2 adult blue Draco Liches or even 5 Mummy Lords, all of which sport deadly abilities that your party would be better off avoiding altogether if it can be helped. The most deadly aspect of this is the fact that he can combine various combinations of enemies to help cover the weaknesses of either himself or the creatures being summoned. The Lich, for example, could simply cast Globe of Invulnerability around itself and the Nightwalker in order to gain some protection against lesser magics, while the Nightwalker itself can force creatures that choose to come closer to the Lich to try and attack it to make saving throws against its annihilating aura. An adult blue Draco Lich can provide air support and can attempt to knock creatures prone with its wing attack or frighten creatures with its frightful presence. Mummy Lords can prevent healing and can reduce maximum hit points with its Rotting Fist action, can paralyze creatures with fear using its Dreadful Glare action, cause blindness and can stun using Blinding Dust and Blasphemous Word legendary action respectively. And since the creatures conjured through the use of this feature don't ever go away unless Orcus himself dismisses them of his own volition, it is possible for Orcus to just build up armies of powerful undeads over the course of several days if he really wanted to. And if you thought that was enough to make Orcus feel powerful, then wait until you learn about his legendary and lair actions. First, we'll go over his legendary actions. The first one is a normal attack where he makes 1 tail or necrotic bolt attack. His legendary action Creeping Death, which costs 2 actions out of 3 to use, allows Orcus to create a 60-foot tall cylinder of necrotic energy within 100 feet of him that encompasses a 10-foot radius, that lasts until the end of Orcus' next turn. Any creature in that area will have vulnerability to necrotic damage, which can make the likes of Circle of Death and Finger of Death extremely potent, since targets would take twice the amount of damage from sources of necrotic damage. In terms of lair actions, which occur on initiative count 20, Deadly Utterance can subject a creature in his lair to the effects of Power Word Kill without using any resources. He also doesn't need to see the creature, just be aware that the creature is in his lair at all. Grasp of the Dead restrains creatures within a 20-foot square that he can see with a failed DC 23 strength saving throw until the next initiative count of 20, or until Orcus decides to release them. And his Undead Servant's action raises up to 6 corpses within Orcus' lairs as skeletons, zombies, or ghouls and obey his commands telepathically, which reaches anywhere in his lair. This lair action is also the reason why he doesn't really need Animate Dead to take any action to raise one of your dead party members unless he aims to try and do it on one of his turns. His original effect, Carnal Realm, basically fills the air with stench of rotting flesh and a lot of buzzing flies. However, Undead Beasts is actually pretty dangerous. Essentially, any beasts that are dead in the region will occasionally animate as undead versions of themselves. So you might find a lot of skeleton or zombie wildlife traveling in the region Orcus' lair resides in. And to top it all off, Orcus also receives 3 random buffs while he's attuned to the wand itself. Normally, the one attuned to the wand gains 2 minor beneficial and detrimental properties and 1 major beneficial and detrimental property. The detrimental properties don't affect Orcus himself, but the power of the beneficial ones kind of vary depending on what the DM rolls for or decides to grant him. If you take a look at the list of minor beneficial properties, you might see how some of these might work real well with Orcus, while others not so much. Immunity to being charmed or frightened would be a dead benefit to Orcus since he already has immunity to both. But being able to have resistance to random damage types of the DM's choice can make the fight a bit harder to deal with. As for the major beneficial properties, there are some pretty good choices for Orcus to have, such as dealing an extra 1d6 damage to make him slightly deadlier, or healing 1d6 hit points at the start of his turns to grant him more sustain. Giving him the ability to cast a 7th level spell of his choice, such as Draconic Transformation, can provide more flexibility or versatility to his fight. Granting him immunity to being stunned would make him impossible for monks to bait out his 3 legendary resistances as well. Overall, Orcus is such a formidable opponent. Even if he chooses not to use his Conjure Undead feature to spawn minions, you're still dealing with a monster that has high hit points, high AC, magic resistance, legendary resistances, multiple power word kills, including the lair action ones that don't even require the creature to be in Orcus' line of sight, and the ability to make creatures take twice the amount of necrotic damage, making Finger of Death deal a whopping 123 average damage on a failed saving throw against it. And if you add the benefits of the Wand of Orcus, you can potentially grant him buffs and abilities that he wouldn't normally have, and can provide a bit of randomness to the fight as well. Like for example, Orcus casting Polymorph on a party member to make them into a creature with less than 100 hit points instantly, and then follows with his Power Word Kill lair action if no one breaks them free of it in time, is an extremely dangerous combo since a creature that's wild shape or forced to be changed by the Polymorph spell is still killed by Power Word Kill, regardless of how much hit points are remaining in the original form. There are just too many potential ways you can make this boss fight more interesting or more powerful based on the kinds of spells you might have access to due to the benefits of the wand alone. Even without the wand, Orcus still sports everything else in his kit that will still prove to be a challenge for players looking for a good fight. Because of his ability to stand on his own, even without the things that make him challenging, it feels apt to name him the most powerful creature in D&D 5e by putting him number 1 spot on this list. Challenge rating is a simple metric by which you can easily judge how tough an encounter will be for a party. For example, a challenge rating of 5 is considered a normal encounter for a party of 4 level 5 adventurers. In this video, we've gone over monsters that are much deadlier than their challenge rating suggests and can pose a significant challenge for players. Starting off at number 10, we have the Night Hag. These are CR 5 fiend monsters that are incredibly tanky, sporting 112 hit points on average with an AC of 17, along with some very important damage resistances to cold and fire damage, as well as non-magical, non-silvered weapons. This means that the average level 5 party will have a hard time taking down a single Night Hag. But the most dangerous thing about the Night Hag is its ability to escape danger with their etherealness ability. Night Hags can use its ability to enter the ethereal plane, making them untouchable by creatures who can't enter it. This allows the Night Hag to move in and out of combat, casting spells like Magic Missile and Sleep, and picking apart players who aren't ready for tricks. Being so hard to deal with means that players might not be able to finish off a Night Hag at all, leaving it to stalk them for another plane if the tides turn against the Hag. The next time players take a rest, she can swoop in, then use her incredibly deadly Nightmare Haunting ability. This causes the target creature to lose 1d10 maximum hit points, which can only be healed by a Greater Restoration spell, which is not something level 5 players would have access to yet, as the earliest it can be learned is at level 9. The real kicker about this ability is that the Hag gets to use this from the safety of the ethereal plane, letting her slowly drain players every time they rest until they figure out a way to deal with her. Night Hags become even more dangerous in groups when they form covens and gain access to more dangerous spells, like Eye Bite, Polymorph, and Lightning Bolt. These fiendish abilities make Night Hags some of the most dangerous monsters to encounter for low-level parties. The only thing Night Hags really lack is a high damage ability, otherwise it would be much higher on this list. But as most of the spells are control-oriented, she only takes the number 10 spot on this list instead. And at number 9, we have the Ropers. These are CR 5 monstrosities with 93 hit points on average, and a whopping 20 AC, making them pretty hard to hit for even level 5 characters and up. What makes the Roper dangerous isn't just its high AC, but its ability to be near imperceivable with its false appearance ability. This allows it to appear as a harmless cave formation until it launches a surprise attack on an unsuspecting party member, typically from the ceiling at a great distance, making it even harder to deal with. The Roper's most deadly offensive ability is its Tendril attack, which can reach up to 50 feet and, on a successful hit, immediately grapples and restrains the target. The target also has disadvantage on strength checks, making the use of athletics to break the grapple significantly harder for strength-based characters. And it can make up to 4 tendril attacks in one turn, potentially restraining the entire party in a single turn, then immediately reeling them up to 25 feet. This makes even escaping a dangerous ordeal, as players risk suffering fall damage after spending their entire turn trying to break free. And if they don't break free, they'll eventually get reeled into the Roper's high damaging bite attack, which will attack at advantage thanks to the tendrils restraining the player, and the bite hits for 4d8 plus 4 piercing damage. They also have 60 feet of dark vision, making them extremely capable in dark caves where players who don't have dark vision might struggle. Ropers are incredibly dangerous in their habitats and can pose quite a difficult challenge for unprepared parties. So, when adventuring in caves, always watch out for stalactites that start wiggling. Next up at number 8 on this list is a lower CR monster, the Hobgoblin. Hobgoblins are CR 1/2 creatures, and when it comes to fractional CRs, it means against a level 1 party, you can throw 2 of them at them. So it's expected for there to be at least 2 Hobgoblins in an encounter. Despite their low hit points at 11, Hobgoblins sport a very high 18 AC. This means that low-level characters will struggle to successfully hit them, even if they will only go down in 2 to 3 hits. And with the lack of reliable saving throw spells at such low levels, a few Hobgoblins can be quite a deadly encounter for a level-appropriate party to attempt. What makes them extremely dangerous is their special ability called Martial Advantage. Martial Advantage works similar to a rogue sneak attack ability. Once returned, the Hobgoblin can deal an extra 2d6 damage to the creature it hits, provided there is an ally of the Hobgoblin within 5 feet of the creature. Which means that with its longsword attack, if it used 2 hands, the Hobgoblin can do 2d6 plus 1d10 plus 1 slashing damage in a single hit, which on average will do 14 damage. This means that classes with less than a d10 as their hit die could easily be knocked unconscious in a single hit. And even the classes with a d10 hit die, unless they start the game with an 18 in Constitution, they would still have less than 14 hit points at level 1, Barbarians have the best chance to live as their hit die is a d12, and if they have an 18 constitution on top of that, they'd start with 16 hit points. But with this, it's still versus the average damage roll. If the Hobgoblin rolls the maximum damage of 23 with his attacker, can outright kill any character with less than 12 hit points. And a wizard who, with Tasha's custom lineage, started with a constitution score of 20, would still only have 11 HP at level 1. So because of how deadly this creature is when pitted against low-level players, it takes a spot on this list. But a lower spot as the rest of this list has some horrifying creatures. In that same vein, at number 7, we have the Fire Newt Warrior. It has the same CR as the Hobgoblin at 1/2, but is arguably tougher to deal with thanks to its 22 hit points and 16 AC. While its AC is lower than the Hobgoblin's, 16 is still very good for its CR. But the 22 HP is what really makes this guy a contender, as that is twice what the Goblin has, and going from 3 hits max to take down the Hobgoblin all the way to now you're looking at more than 4 to 5, meaning they can realistically survive a round of attacks from the party. They don't have quite the damage capability of the Hobgoblins, as their attacks aren't as strong as Martial Advantage. Their Bolty attack allows them to make 2 Scimitar attacks for 1d6 plus 1 slashing damage each, which is 2 more than Martial Advantage before you add in the Hobgoblin's Longsword attack. That said, the Fire Newt does have some guaranteed damage in the form of their Spitfire ability. Once per short or long rest, a Fire Newt Warrior can use this to spit a gout of fire at an enemy for 2d8 fire damage on a failed dexterity saving throw, or half damage on a success. While the DC isn't high at only 11, the important part is that the Fire Newt Warrior is guaranteed at least half damage with the ability, which can hit from range, though only 10 feet. Since a normal encounter for even a level 1 party is at least 2 of these creatures, they could immediately down a level 1 character with their Fire Spit if they failed one of the saves, assuming average damage. Guaranteed damage combined with some decent HP makes the Fire Newt Warrior a deceptively intense challenge for low-level parties, especially level 1 parties who would be the most likely characters to take on such low CR monsters. Even higher level characters encountering large groups of Fire Newt Warriors for an appropriate CR challenge would struggle to fend off a flurry of Fire Spit attacks doing damage to any character who doesn't have resistance or evasion. A lesser note, but one that must be included, is the fact that the Fire Newt Warrior also has immunity to fire damage, which means that at low levels, cantrips like Create Bonfire and Firebolt won't help you against them. And when facing hordes of them at higher levels, you can't just throw out a fireball to wipe them out. Due to the added threat from the Spitfire and the significant HP bump, the Fire Newt Warrior does just edge out the Goblin for the number 7 spot on this list. And at number 6, we have the Ghost. Ghosts are CR4 undead monsters with 45 hit points and 11 AC. This is all fairly low for CR4. While they do have a list of nice resistances and immunities to make up for it, its defensive stats aren't what make it a threat. The real danger of the Ghost is in its possession ability. The Ghost forces a creature you can see within 5 feet to make a charisma saving throw or be possessed. This incapacitates the target and gives the Ghost control over its body. It also makes the Ghost untargetable by all abilities except ones that turn undead. Once possessed, the only way to make the Ghost leave the possessed creature is by its own will, knocking the possessed character to 0 hit points, or casting the 5th level spell Dispel Evil and Good. And you don't gain access to 5th level spells until level 9, so a level 4 party going up against a Ghost would have no other choice but to knock their friend unconscious unless they can afford a pricey spell scroll. This can lead to a dangerous spiral where the Ghost keeps possessing new targets over and over, forcing a party to fight its own members, as the only way to get it out is to knock their own allies unconscious. And this strategy is super effective, as your fighters and barbarians who have the highest HP will often need to dump charisma for strength, dexterity, and constitution, leaving them as easy pickings for the Ghost. Even once the Ghost is out, it can shift into the ethereal plane, just like the Night Hag, so it can't be targeted or attacked. It can also ambush very effectively thanks to its incorporeal movement, which allows it to pass through solid objects. And while it doesn't affect combat as much, perhaps the scariest part of the Ghost is its horrifying visage ability, which lets it magically age every non-undead creature within 60 feet of it by 1d4 times 10 years, if they fail the DC 13 Wisdom save by 5 or more. Because you see, this aging requires a cast of Greater Restoration to reverse, and if not reversed within 24 hours, it becomes permanent. If you're playing a young character, this might not matter, but if your character is older, or you're part of a shorter-lived species, this could theoretically be deadly. This ability is a holdover from the earlier editions in which undead were much scarier than they are now in 5th edition. And if you want to learn more about that, you can check out What They Don't Tell You About Undeads over on Mr. Rex's channel. All of this amounts to a low CR monster that can easily wipe a party with a bit of bad luck. And at number 5, we have the Intellect Devourer. An Intellect Devourer is a CR2 aberration with only 21 hit points and 12 AC. But much like the Ghost, what they lack in defense, they make up for their dangerous capabilities to instantly incapacitate and then kill characters. particularly those with low intelligence, thanks to their Devour Intellect and Body Thief abilities. Devour Intellect forces a creature to make an intelligence saving throw or take 2d10 psychic damage. Not that deadly on its own, but if a creature fails, you roll 3d6. If that total equals or exceeds the target's intelligence score, the target's intelligence becomes 0 and they're stunned until they regain 1 point of intelligence. Wizards and Artificers are the only classes that use intelligence as their primary stat. And as the abilities that require intelligence don't come up too much, most characters use intelligence as a dump stat, favoring their primary stat, then Constitution, Charisma, or Dexterity, Wisdom, then tied for last, Intelligence and Strength. This leaves the other classes incredibly susceptible to this ability. Only things like Greater Restoration can cure ability score reductions, which is something a party of level 2 adventurers won't have for another 7 levels. It can further take advantage of the stunned targets by stealing the body of the incapacitated target after an opposed intelligence check with its Body Thief ability, something that would be trivial against a target whose intelligence has been reduced to 0. This lets the Intellect Devourer magically consume the target's brain, enter their body, and use the target's body against its allies. This is similar to the Ghost with their Possession ability, but with much more dire consequences, as even if it's forced out by having the player's body be reduced to 0 hit points, the body dies within 1 round unless its brain is somehow restored by high-level magic. Considering most classes don't have a reason to increase their intelligence at this level, Intellect Devourers remain potent threats to most players well beyond the early levels of the game, and even a single one ambush in a high-level party can be disastrous. And because of that, it takes the number 5 spot on this list. It might have gotten a higher spot, but it's fairly squishy, and thanks to its low AC, as long as it doesn't ambush you, it's most likely dealt with within a single round of combat, even by a level 2 party. And at number 4, we have the Bodak. These are CR 6 undead creatures which have relatively weak stats for the CR with only 58 hit points and 15 AC. Though it does have a number of useful resistances and immunities to increase its durability. But like the previous 2 entries, it makes up for those low stats with its 2 unique abilities. These are called Aura of Annihilation and Death Gaze. Aura of Annihilation is a passive effect that deals 5 necrotic damage to any creature that ends its turn within 30 feet of the Bodak. This means, against a regular party of 4 characters, a Bodak can be dealing 20 damage a turn without ever having to use an action. Death Gaze requires a creature that starts their turn within 30 feet of the Bodak to avert their gaze or be forced to make a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail, they take 3d10 psychic damage, or if it fails by more than 5, the creature immediately is reduced to 0 hit points, as long as they aren't immune to the frightened condition. This is extremely dangerous, as the Aura of Annihilation will make creatures at 0 hit points start immediately failing death saves because of the automatic damage. While you can avert your gaze from the Bodak to avoid the Death Gaze, it comes at the cost of having disadvantage on attack rolls against the Bodak until the start of its next turn. And this would presumably mean that spellcasters in the area of effect wouldn't be able to use the spell that requires line of sight either. So the victims either suffer potentially deadly consequences or severely handicap themselves while Aura of Annihilation wears them down. The only reason the Bodak isn't even higher on this list is because it's still vulnerable to ranged characters, as its most dangerous abilities are limited to a 30-foot area around it, and because Paladins and Clerics have potent offensive options against corporeal undead. But if your party ever encounters a Bodak in an enclosed space, they might be in for a very unpleasant time. And at number 3, we have the notorious Mind Flayer. These are CR 7 aberrations with 71 hit points and 15 AC. The main thing that makes the Mind Flayer such an intimidating monster is in its ability to use its Mind Blast, which in a 60-foot cone causes every creature to make an intelligence saving throw or take 48 plus 4 psychic damage and be stunned for a full minute. Creatures can repeat the saving throw at the end of the next turn, and they still lose that turn because of how crippling the stun condition is. This is basically an area of effect version of the Intellect Devourer's Devour Intellect ability, crippling an entire party if they fail their intelligence saves. But Mind Flayers are also deadly in regular combat, as their tentacle attack does a respectable 2d10 plus 4 psychic damage and grapples the target on hit, forcing the creature to make an intelligence saving throw or be stunned until the grapple ends. So players aren't safe in melee either. This fulfills the condition for the Mind Flayer's most deadly ability, Extract Brain. The Mind Flayer can attack and capacitate a humanoid it has grappled and deal an enormous 10d10 psychic damage. And if the damage drops the target to 0 hit points, the target immediately dies to having its brain extracted from its skull and eaten by the Mind Flayer. This combination of abilities allows a single Mind Flayer to incapacitate and potentially immediately kill players with relative ease. If that wasn't enough, Mind Flayers also have an arcane spellcaster variant called the Mind Flayer Arcanist, which can do everything the normal Mind Flayer can in addition to casting a handful of spells, most notably Wall of Force, Shield, Invisibility, Confusion, and Hallucinatory Terrain. Though this does increase its CR by 1 up to CR 8, which is still ridiculous. Mind Flayers are notorious for TPKs because they target the save that is typically the weakest against players, and makes failed saves quite lethal. Sliding at number 2 is the Beholder. These are CR 13 aberrations, and remain one of the most recognizable Dungeons & Dragons monsters due to its striking design. The most dangerous aspect of the Beholder is the many rays that it fires from its eye stalks. On its turn, it can fire 3 random rays at any target, with a wide range of dangerous effects. Its eye beam can charm, fear, slow, put to sleep, and even petrify targets. The most deadly rays, though, are the incredibly high damaging disintegration and death rays. The disintegration ray forces dexterity save or taking 10d8 force damage, and if it reduces the target to 0 hit points, they're disintegrated into a pile of dust, making healing and most resurrection useless. The death ray works similarly, dealing even more damage with 10d10 necrotic damage, and while it doesn't disintegrate the body, it does still automatically kill a target and drops to 0, making healing useless. If all that wasn't scary enough, the Beholder has a fly speed of 20 feet, with a hover meaning that it can't be knocked out of the air while allowing it to remain forever out of melee range. Also, it can just delete magic as its main eye functions like an anti-magic field spell, but up to a 150-foot cone, and it can move the cone at the start of each of its turns, or deactivate it completely if it so chooses. Luckily for an adventurer, the anti-magic cone also renders the Beholder's own eye rays inert, as they too are magical. In addition to all of that, the Beholder has 3 legendary actions which it can use to fire off an additional eye ray at the end of another creature's turn. And it even has lair actions if you're fighting it while it's in its lair. However, that does increase its CR to 14. While you would encounter Beholders much later in the game than most of the other creatures on this list, even running into it at level 13, it will still be rough to beat, which is fitting given it's probably the second most iconic monster in the game. The only thing truly holding the Beholder back from being unstoppably deadly in most scenarios is that the rays it fires are decided randomly, meaning luck of the dice will decide just how deadly or not the Beholder ends up being. But luck is not a problem at all for the final spot on this list. Coming in at the number 1 spot, we have the most iconic creatures in Dungeons & Dragons, the Dragons. These range all the way from CR1 Wyrmlings up to CR24 Ancient Dragons and beyond. What makes these the most dangerous monsters in the game is that, at nearly every level of play, there's an incredibly deadly, level-appropriate dragon with a decent fly speed and a breath weapon that can easily take down an entire party in a single action while also being incredibly resilient. As an example, a CR2 Black Dragon Wyrmling has a ridiculous 33 hit points and 17 AC, and with its breath weapon averaging 22 acid damage on a failed saving throw, more than enough to down most level 2 characters in a single blast. And it's AoE, so it can hit multiple targets. Every kind of dragon follows this pattern of high damage, high hit points, and high AC as you further climb in levels. And they get even more powerful by gaining new abilities, such as legendary actions, legendary resistances, more attacks, alternative crowd control breath weapons, super senses like blind sight. Any enemy with flight and ranged attack options can pose a significant problem for even a well-prepared party. But dragons take this combination to the extreme. Few monsters are harder to beat than a dragon with an open sky. While there may be legendary monsters that, on their own, are more powerful than any individual dragon, no other kind of creature is so deadly at all levels of play. If you broke them up individually, you could have 40 different distinctly deadly monsters at various CR levels, which is why they have to take the top spot on this list. In this video, we'll be going over high CR monsters who are kind of weak for their high CR rating, and I'll be using a minimum CR of 15 for this video, going all the way up to the maximum of 30. And to start off this video, we'll go over a CR 22 monster, the Zaratan. This is a gargantuan elemental with only 2 intelligence, so it's really dumb and will try to single-mindedly kill whatever's in front of it. With its normal multi-attack action, it only deals around 54 damage on average, which isn't a lot. For comparison, the CR 15 Purple Worm deals around 83 damage on average with its multi-attack, that only hits 2 times. And the Purple Worm isn't even the highest damage dealing CR 15 creature, although it is pretty good at what it does. So I'll be kind of using it as a measuring stick for the rest of this video. Although even with dealing less damage than a CR 15 creature, it does make up for it with its legendary actions, where one of them is the ability to make an extra stomp attack. And if it uses the stomp 3 times, then its average damage jumps up all the way to 132, which definitely makes it the second highest average damage of all the monsters that will appear on this list, and kind of why it's only at the number 10 spot. Although this is assuming you use all of its legendary actions in order to stomp. This creature wasn't really intended to be used in this way. You see, it has a unique legendary action called Retract, which costs 2 of its action to use, and causes the monster to retreat into its shell, giving it resistances to all damage, but also treating the creature as restrained. Now, resistance to all damage is nice, basically takes half damage. The restrained condition means that it can't move, has disadvantage on all of its attacks, and all attacks against it have advantage, so it really kind of cancels out the benefit that you receive. And the only reason to use Retract is in order to use its other 2 legendary actions, which can only be used if the creature is currently retracted. But both of those cost 2 actions to use as well. So, with only having 3 legendary actions, you have to wait until your next turn in order to use either of them. One of them allows it to heal for around 50 hit points, and the other one allows it to use its Spit Rock ability, which it can use with one of its 2 legendary actions without having to use Retract. Spit Rock is just a ranged attack, which hits for around 40 damage, and isn't half bad, I guess, but not more damage than just using Stomp with all 3 legendary actions. So its little gimmick of retreating into its shell is kind of bad, and you're better off just ignoring those features altogether. The creature also has vulnerability, which is kind of rare for high CR creatures, where it takes double damage from thunder attacks. But it does have a neat bonus action, which basically allows it to destroy obstacles and create difficult terrain in a 120-foot radius. So this thing is deadly if you fight in the middle of a city, and not at all dangerous if you have the ability to fly, which a lot of high-level characters do have. Now, it does also have an AoE ability called Spew Debris, which doesn't hit very hard for a high-level AoE, but it does have a really wide radius of a 90-foot cube, so it is an option if you can hit the entire party with it, but it won't actually do more damage than its multi-attack unless it hits at least 2 or more targets. Now, another funny thing of note with this creature, despite the fact that it's a giant turtle, it actually has less health and AC than the Ancient Bronze Dragon, which is also a CR22 creature. In fact, it has less health than all of the Ancient Dragons and is being out in AC by half of them. Speaking of dragons, at number 9, we have the Ancient Red Dragon. This is a CR24 creature, which deals around 126 damage on average during its turn, assuming you include its 3 legendary actions using its tail for maximum damage efficiency, which, funny enough, is slightly less damage than the Zaratan, but it does have significantly more health and 1 higher AC, as it has an impressive 550 health on average. Although, why is one of the hallmarks of Dungeons & Dragons on a list of worst high-level monsters? Well, because it doesn't really do much outside of its Fire Breath. Its Fire Breath is really good. It deals around 91 damage on average to everything in a 90-foot cone, which is straight up more damage single target than if it took its multi-attack option. And if you're able to hit the entire party with it, then it's actually quite a bit of damage. Although, it's fire damage, which is one of the most easiest types of damage to get a resistance to. And it requires a dex save, which is one of the easiest types of saving throws for a lot of classes, with some classes being able to straight up not take any damage if they succeed it. So its most devastating attack might not do much if used directly in a party of high-level adventurers. And then outside of the Fire Breath, it can't really do much. The best way to play the dragon is just to have it flying and do hit-and-run tactics, but it doesn't have flyby, so it takes attacks of opportunity if you go in for hits and aren't able to outrange them with its 10 feet of reach, and it kind of needs to stay within reach to use its legendary actions to attack. There's also the fact that this super high CR creature instantly loses to a single force cage, which it has no way to save itself from, and it's basically just stuck there for an hour until it goes away, or until you combo it with something else that kills it inside. Since the creature doesn't have a way to teleport, it only has 3 legendary actions per turn and no other special abilities. So with a properly timed and positioned Fire Breath, you could potentially take out a whole party with 1 attack, but it's one of the worst types of damage to try to do this with, using one of the worst types of saving throws, so there's really good chance that it's just not going to work. And at number 8, we have the Lich. Now, this might seem kind of like an odd creature to put on a list of worst high-level monsters, because the Lich is another hallmark of Dungeons & Dragons, and is usually the end boss of a whole bunch of campaigns. But the Lich has one little flaw that definitely lets it deserve a spot on this list, which I'll go over in a little bit. Now, the Lich is a CR21 creature, and it has the potential to deal around 124 damage per round, counting legendary actions, all using maximum damage efficiency of casting 3 cantrips. And 124 damage is not half bad. That definitely beats the threshold of the Purple Worm, although this is counting its legendary actions. It can only deal around 60 to 70 damage on its own turn without them, and that's through the use of its highest damaging spells like Finger of Death or Disintegrate. Now, the Lich does have Power Word Kill available to it, which means it has the ability to instantly kill one low health party member, which is usually a healer or a squishy spellcaster in the backline. But Power Word Kill has a 60-foot range, which just happens to be the range that Counterspell requires in order to be used. So if you do want to use your one action for the turn to kill one party member, and the Lich is close enough in order to use the spell, it's going to have to cast it through a barrage of counterspells trying to stop it. Although even then, an instant kill is still not half bad. It's just not very likely to go off because of the major flaw of the Lich. You see, the Lich only has 135 health on average. The Purple Worm has 247 health as a CR 15 creature. The low health of a Vampire Warrior, who is also CR 15, even has slightly more health at 144 on average. The Lich has an absolutely abysmal health pool, and can be killed in a single round by a high-level fighter, if it just beats it on initiative and gets into melee range. And there's a good chance it will be low on initiative since it only has a +3 dex, and a high-level party will easily be able to deal 135 points of damage in a round. The Lich has got to be one of the lowest health pools of all high CR creatures, and he only has 17 AC, which he can increase to 23 if it uses shield as a reaction, although it's probably better saved for a counterspell. He does also have a whole bunch of other immunities and resistances, but those are easily overcome by just not using poison damage against it, and having a magic weapon. And the spells it does have aren't that scary, to be honest. Power Word Kill sounds more scary than it actually is. If it had something like Force Cage, then it would be something to contend with. If you want to run a Lich, you might want to double its health and give it better spells to use. Kind of like what they suggest in Tomb of Annihilation, where they tell you in the module that you can swap out the final boss's spells with any other wizard spells to fit your playstyle, since they knew the Lich spells themselves are probably not that powerful, and they're best used for running away as soon as a high-level party gets to them, instead of attacking, using stuff like Invisibility or Dimension Door. As the module even says, the Lich's #1 tool against fighting adventurers is time, as eventually they all die of old age. And at number 7, we have the Androsphinx. This is the first creature that is below challenge rating 20 to appear on the list, only being a CR 17 creature. Now, the Androsphinx only deals 34 damage on its turn with its multi-attack, which is kind of laughably bad for a high CR creature. But it does have legendary actions, and can make a claw attack with only one of its actions, which brings its average damage up to 85 per round with those 3 extra attacks, which is a lot more respectable. This allows it to pass the Purple Worm test, dealing a little more damage than the average amount of a Purple Worm, counting all of its legendary actions. Now, the Androsphinx itself is not really made for combat. It's more of an RP creature that has a whole bunch of flavor spells that it has available to it, which is why it doesn't really have any scary spells to use. The best damaging spell it has is Flame Strike, which it can use with 3 of its legendary actions, but it's not really the best use of a 5th level spell slot, and only does as much damage as a Fireball. It does, however, have the Banishment spell, which is pretty powerful and can completely remove half the party from the fight if it uses it with its 6th level spell slot, assuming the average party size of 5 to 6. It does also have this unique Roar feature, where it gets stronger the more times it uses it, but it needs to use its full action each turn in order to use a Roar, and the Roar effect only gets good on its second try, where it has a chance to actually paralyze creatures, and then the third Roar actually deals some decent damage. Although the Androsphinx would probably be dead by the time it gets to the third turn in order to use its third Roar, it does have less health than the Purple Worm, at only around 200 on average, but it does still have more health than the Lich, which isn't saying much. I think part of the reason this creature isn't as strong is definitely because it's not really supposed to be used for combat very much, and it's usually used only against the really low-level characters, where it would definitely live long enough in order to use all of its roars and not be that much of a threat. I think part of the reason this creature isn't as strong is definitely because it's not really supposed to be used for combat very much, or just against really low-level characters, where it would definitely live long enough to use all 3 of its roars, and the reason it has low damage is so it doesn't completely wipe them out too quickly. And at number 6, we have the Vampire Warrior. This is a variant of the vampire which wears plate armor and wields a greatsword, and also has a higher challenge rating because of this, putting it up to 15, which is the lowest limit for the arbitrary numbers I added for this video. Now, the Vampire Warrior, assuming highest damage dealing abilities and its legendary actions, can deal about 53 damage on average, which is definitely less than the 83 of the Purple Worm. It also only has about 100 less health than the Purple Worm, and has a whole bunch of weaknesses which are basically there for lore reasons, because vampires in literature have a whole bunch of weaknesses and they definitely carried over into D&D. Although vampires do have a few good things going for them. They have the charm action, which can allow it to slowly turn the entire party to his side, as if they fail a DC 17 wisdom save, they treat the vampire as a trusted friend and willing to perform requests for the vampire in the most favorable way it can, which lasts for 24 hours, or until they succeed another saving throw and they take damage or something. So since its normal actions don't do very much damage, it's probably better off just trying to charm the party one by one, and using its legendary actions to perform its strikes and bite attacks, which have a chance to heal him for a little bit if it deals damage. It's also really good at running away thanks to its Misty Escape and the ability to shape change. Plus it heals every turn assuming it's not subjected to one of its million weaknesses. For the high CR rating the vampire has, it kind of deals really mediocre damage, has a whole bunch of weaknesses, and its best ability uses a full action and is a save or nothing type ability. And at number 5, we have the Leviathan. This is a CR 20 creature, which deals around 62 damage on average, counting all of its legendary actions, so it definitely fails the Purple Worm test of dealing less than 83 damage with a full turn of abilities. Although the damage it deals isn't really the main point of this creature, it's definitely the tidal wave action it has, where it's a huge AoE that's 250 feet long and high, 50 feet thick, and puts everyone who's caught in it underwater where they have to succeed a DC 24 athletics check in order to swim during their turn, which a lot of classes straight up can't pass. Although the tidal wave doesn't really do that much damage for being the main selling point of this creature, at only around 33 damage on average during the first turn, where it decreases every turn that the ability is up until it loses all of its water. And it can potentially only use tidal wave a single time per combat since it has a recharge of 6. Leviathan also has a weakness, where if it takes 50 or more cold damage in a single turn, it starts to partially freeze. Where its speed is reduced by 20, it makes all of its attacks at disadvantage, which is a pretty substantial negative debuff. Having disadvantage basically means you're not going to hit anything anymore, so you can completely render this thing worthless by just pumping a whole bunch of cold damage into it really fast. It does have a neat little ability where it can occupy the same space as someone else, and has legendary actions to move so it can keep close to things, but it also doesn't have any teleport, so it instantly loses to any kind of force cage. Although it does at least have legendary resistances, so it doesn't lose to all types of spells instantly. If it wasn't for Tidal Wave being kind of decent, I probably would have put this at a lower spot on the list, instead of only at the middle, because it has to jump through hoops that do so little damage, as it can only get one extra attack with its legendary actions. And at number 4, we have the Dragon Turtle. The Dragon Turtle is a CR 17 creature, which has more health than the Zaratan, clocking in at 341 health. Which really makes sense since, it's a big turtle. It almost seems like a huge oversight that the Zaratan has such little health for what it's supposed to be. Anyways, having a high health pool is basically the only thing the Dragon Turtle has going well for it. It's an aquatic creature, so it only has a land movement speed of 20 feet. It can at least breathe air and water, so it's not completely screwed if it's on land. It only has 40 feet of swim speed underwater, which is 3 times less than the Leviathan, and it can only deal around 58 damage on average with its multi-attack, which is definitely less than the Purple Worm, but not the lowest damage of all the creatures on this list. The lowest is still probably the Vampire Warrior, but seeing as he's a CR 15, that's kind of reasonable. Now, the Dragon Turtle does have a nice Steam Breath ability, which hits all targets in a 60-foot cone for around 53 fire damage each, and this ability requires a Constitution save instead of a Dexterity one, which is slightly better for actually hitting a full party of adventurers. Although unlike the ancient Red Dragon's Fire Breath, this one does not deal more damage single target than its multi-attack. You would have to position it to hit at least 2 or more targets to be worth using it, and it's really the only good thing it has going for it outside of its higher than normal health pool. If you want a big tank that's able to just absorb a lot of damage against a tier 3 level party, the Dragon Turtle definitely fits that niche, as you won't really have to worry about it killing any of your party members either. And at number 3, we have the Night Walker. This is a CR20 creature which doesn't have legendary actions or resistances, so it auto-loses to any kind of control that it's not immune to, which it is immune to a lot of them, to be fair. It only deals around 56 damage on average, which is slightly higher than the Vampire Warrior, who is 5 CR levels lower than it. Although it does have a really scary trait called Life Eater, where if it drops a character to 0 hit points, it dies and can't be revived by anything short of a wish. So I'm assuming that's why it has such low damage and stats, because being killed by this creature hurts more than pretty much all the other creatures on this list. And I assume it's this feature that gives it such a high challenge rating, because it does have an appropriate health pool for the CR rating at around 300. Its armor class is ridiculously low though at only 14, and it only does a minor amount of damage with its Annihilating Aura, which affects creatures that start their turn within 30 feet of it. Otherwise, for how little damage this creature does, it really should be a much lower CR rating. And at number 2, we have the Tarrasque. This is only one of 2 CR30 creatures in the game, and can deal around 232 damage on average, counting its multi-attack and legendary actions. So it definitely hits the hardest out of all of the creatures on this list, and it's even softly immune to targeted spells with its Reflected Carapace, where if you just have a spell that has an attack roll or a line, you don't want to use it on a Tarrasque. It also has 3 legendary resistances and a really big beefy health pool at 675 on average. So, why is a big, tanky creature that's able to deal a whole bunch of damage in one turn on this list, and at such a high spot too? Here's the thing with the Tarrasque. You can beat the Tarrasque with a party of level 1 rangers that are each equipped with a +1 longbow, who also have a way to fly with something like a flying carpet, and a lot of patience, as the Tarrasque has no ranged abilities at all. It also loses to Force Cage, since it doesn't have a teleport, and a whole bunch of other combinations of high-level spells. But there's also that fact that a patient ranger with a flying speed can kind of take out a Tarrasque by itself, assuming they have a lot of free time, of course, since there's not much the Tarrasque can do other than try to run away or hide behind cover. So it kind of has a few glaring weaknesses that allow you to render it almost useless, despite the fact that it does have the potential to take a lot of damage and dish out a lot of damage if it's able to hit things. And at number 1, we have the Kraken. This is a CR23 creature who's able to deal around 83 damage on average, counting its legendary actions, which allows it to barely match the Purple Worm in damage for a turn, despite being 8 challenge rating levels higher. This is to say it doesn't do a lot of damage, but that's because a lot of its damaging moves have a whole bunch of extra effects to them, so that's fine. Some creatures are just kind of built for doing other things besides dealing damage. It does also have the Lightning Storm ability, which it's able to spam if there's at least 3 creatures within 120 feet of it, where it does deal more damage than its other abilities since it doesn't have the multi-attack feature, as Lightning Storm allows it to target up to 3 creatures and deal around 22 lightning damage to each of them. It can also use 3 tentacle attacks with its legendary actions, and even another use of Lightning Storm using 2 of its legendary actions. It has a pretty high health pool at around 475, which is also higher than the Zaratan. It's immune to lightning damage, and it can even throw targets that it's grappled, which is a neat feature that a lot of creatures that can grapple don't usually have. But there is one glaring weakness to the Kraken, besides the fact that it doesn't do a lot of damage, and that's the fact that it doesn't have legendary resistances. The Nightwalker also doesn't have legendary resistances and is also a high CR creature, but that thing is immune to basically all forms of crowd control anyway, so it kinda gets a pass on that. The Kraken is only immune to the Frightened and Paralyzed condition, so it just auto-loses to a handful of really good spells in the game, which is something that's easily prevented by just giving epic level creatures some legendary resistances. That way they're not instantly defeated by a single banishment. It of course also loses to Force Cage since it can't teleport, and a whole bunch of other crowd control spells. The Kraken is one of the few high CR creatures that doesn't have legendary resistances, and it also doesn't do a lot of damage, and it's really kind of a disappointing creature because of how iconic the Kraken is, and how it's an excellent creature to have as a final boss in an aquatic type of game. Just if you do run the Kraken as a final boss, make sure to homebrew some legendary resistances into it, so it's not defeated by the first crowd control spell your casters throw on it. Have you ever wanted to have a really thematic final boss fight, only for your party to completely destroy it in one round? Or do you accidentally make them too hard and cause a TPK that makes everybody angry? Well, in this list, we'll go over some helpful tips you can use in order to help balance your boss fights. Starting off at number 10, we have the default way of balancing boss fights, and that's with the appropriate challenge rating. The Dungeon Master Guide suggests using the XP of monsters versus a chart in your characters to find some balance. For example, if you're trying to balance a boss fight around 4 characters at the 3rd level, and you want the combat encounter to be deadly, because we're focusing on boss fights here, that would mean taking 400 and multiplying it by 4, and then choosing a monster from the monster manual whose XP total is 1600 or less. And based on this, you should be able to find an appropriate balance for your group. However, the biggest problem with this is that the monsters vary widely in how powerful they are for their CR, where you have creatures like the Horncaller, which can summon an entire army of giant poisonous snakes to take out the whole party in one round. The Horncaller is only CR1 with an XP budget of only 200. We did 3 videos about this with top 10 dangerous CR1 through 3 creatures, where we look through some of the creatures that are incredibly dangerous despite their low CRs. And then there's other monsters who have a much higher CR rating and are a lot less deadly, where we have a video on this too, looking at some of the weakest monsters that are CR 15+. This is kind of what people mean when they say CR doesn't matter very much, but it does give a good enough baseline if you just want to go with it, and it is a perfectly appropriate way to balance a boss fight. Although for the rest of the entries in this list, we're going to go over what you can do in order to help balance these creatures yourselves without relying on a somewhat flawed challenge rating. Next up at number 9, we have a tip for your homebrew boss monsters, and that's to remember to give them legendary resistances. Legendary resistance is a feature that most boss monsters already have from the monster manual, and basically what it does is allows your monsters to automatically succeed a saving throw if they would otherwise fail it. For low-level boss monsters, you just give them a single legendary resistance. For a higher level, it's a standard to have up to 3. But for super epic boss level monsters, some of them even have 5. The reason you need legendary resistances is because you can kind of instantly win an encounter with some crowd control spells, like a single successful application of Hold Person or even Fear. And if your boss is completely disabled by just a single spell and can't really do anything to harm the party, while they're just attacking into it, then that kind of ruins any boss fight plans you might have had, which is heavily alleviated by just giving them some legendary resistances. And if your spellcasters are able to eat through all the legendary resistances, then they kind of deserve to be able to cast one of these fight-ending spells. And at number 8, we have making your boss fight the last encounter of the day. The average group is able to put out a ton of damage and control if they're fresh and have all their resources, i.e. charges in their class abilities and spell slots. One of the best ways to create a good boss fight, without having to overly balance everything, is to just make sure they have that boss fight at the end of a long adventuring day, where they already had a whole bunch of other combat encounters beforehand, which is eating up many of the resources. It's fine if a party is able to take a short rest before a boss fight, but never a long rest. A party should not be able to long rest in the middle of a dungeon or a hideout, unless they have some kind of a high-level spell or item that lets them accomplish something like that. Simply depleting your party of resources before they get to the final boss is an excellent way to balance a final boss, and probably one of the easiest ones to employ as well. And at number 7, we have give your boss extra actions. Here's a little fun fact about a lot of monsters in the monster manual. They all have the capability of performing a bonus action, but it's pretty rare for them to actually have one listed. So an easy way to give them extra actions in order to up their action economy, especially if you really want to run a solo boss fight, is to simply give them a bonus action. The bonus action could be something like a bonus action spell, summoning a spiritual weapon perhaps, or even just be a heal for themselves or some kind of homebrew ability which allows them to do some kind of minor AoE. There are also other ways to grant extra actions to your boss outside of the ones that you might get through legendary actions. I read a lot of common homebrew stuff about villainous actions, which are basically like legendary actions but happen at the end of the boss's turn, instead of the end of another creature's turn, like legendary actions, or a set turn order like layer actions, and is basically an ability that cycles between 2 or more of your choices, which gives them extra action economy. Like, for example, allowing them to summon minions from the back of the room, or fly into the air and shoot 1 extra ranged attack. However, don't go crazy with adding extra actions. This is mainly just a way to balance out the action economy when a boss is faced with a whole party of player characters. Depending on some of the other balancing things to do on this list, you might not need to add any extra actions at all, as adding bonus actions and villainous actions or special effects that happen when you move around the battlefield is just one of the many tools you can use in order to help balance a boss fight, but it's not really necessary. And at number 6, we have more health. In World of Warcraft, there was a boss who was thought to be mathematically impossible to kill, and only one guild was able to actually take him down by using an incredibly complicated strategy that no one else was able to really replicate. So what they did to make this fight a lot more doable was to simply lower its health by 25%. And this one little nerf turned the fight from impossible to doable overnight. It's really easy to underestimate just how much the health a creature has goes into balancing a fight. If you want to know how much health you should have for one of your monsters, what you can simply do is calculate the average damage per round of your entire party, and then just multiply that number by the amount of rounds you want the fight to last. Usually, a good boss fight should last at least 4 rounds, as things can really start to drag once they get longer than that. So a good number to have is just to take the amount of damage they can do in a round, and then just times that by 4. So if your party is able to put out around 60 damage combined, then your boss should have around 240 health. Which means a fight will be a lot quicker if they get any kind of critical strikes, or a lot longer if they fail a lot of their saving throws or attacks. And at number 5, we have more damage. One of the easiest ways to make a boss fight feel more dangerous is to simply increase the amount of damage that it or its minions do. If a boss normally has a 2d6 weapon that attacks twice with, maybe add 1 extra d6 to its attacks. Or maybe you give it 1 extra attack. Simply adding more damage to a creature is sometimes preferable to groups, rather than adding more health because it makes the fights a lot shorter, but also more dangerous. And it's heavily encouraged not to do both. If you buff the health of a boss and its damage, you'll just end up making the boss too strong most of the time, so it's better to just pick one or the other. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you are increasing its damage, you don't want to also give it extra actions like from the number 7 spot on this list. Still, simply increasing the damage of your boss is a very easy way to make it feel more dangerous, while not actually changing very much else about the creature. Number 4. Is your party going against a boss that they're not ready for? Well, giving your party a single powerful NPC helper can turn the tides in their favor dramatically. If for whatever reason your party has to go against a boss that they're not really prepared for, like as a story beat where they meet the big villain but are still not strong enough to actually beat him yet, a great way to improve their chances of a win without having to nerf your boss is to simply give them a very powerful NPC helper. However, there are right and wrong ways to give your party an NPC helper. You really don't want the NPC to be the main source of damage for the party, or for the party to have to revolve around helping the NPC fight the boss. And a great way to avoid this is to make that NPC helper a spellcaster who focuses on support rather than damage. For example, if you have a high-level bard NPC who's helping them, who is granting inspiration, healing, and generally debuffing the boss, this will actually go a long way to help improve their chances of winning. Or just a spellcaster who focuses on counter spells and maybe also cast a powerful control spell like Eye Bite every turn, which only takes 1 spell slot but allows them to put creatures to sleep or fear them every turn using their action. So for an excellent NPC helper, maybe watch some videos on great support spells they can use and cast on friendly party members in order to buff them, like Bless or Haste, or control spells like Fear and Eye Bite to control enemy targets. Another option for this is something I did a few weeks ago in a game where I ran and had a party face a boss that should have been very deadly for them. I had an NPC that was set to come in and save them if they were all knocked unconscious. This allowed the parties to try their hardest to beat the boss, but served as a sort of safety net if they ended up losing. My party did end up beating the boss, so they didn't end up needing NPC's help, but this is another way to use a powerful NPC. The balancing act with this is basically that you don't want the NPC to only be there as an ex machina, so this option, while good, should only be used sparingly. Moving on to the top spots, at number 3 we have the solo boss encounter. Do you want to have a solo boss fight versus a high-level party? The best advice for helping to balance something like this is to just not do it. Give them some helpers instead. At least 2 of them. The standard is to have a melee fighter and a ranged attacker, but ideally a healer too, or a spellcaster. This definitely makes the combat a lot more tactical, as your party can't just pump all their damage into the boss, and they have to actually split their action economy on separate health pools. However, if you just give the boss a whole bunch of low health minions, that just encourages your party to use their AoE spells and get rid of them within the first round, which is not really the best way to go about it, but even if you do use a whole bunch of low health mobs, that is still better than having a solo boss fight. If you give them 2 to 3 role-specific helpers that are there to help take some damage, provide some support, have spells to help control, or just to heal, this also allows your players to make use of their CC effects because the boss is probably going to be immune to the first 3 spells with their legendary resistances. It will also make some of the party's other AoEs more useful, where even if you don't have a whole horde of low health enemies, it will make their fireball feel as if it hit for much more. There are some ways in order to make a solo boss fight somewhat balanced, as I've given a lot of suggestions earlier on this list, but honestly, the best thing you can do is to just give your boss a couple of decent helpers, and make sure the boss isn't overstated in the health department to compensate for the fact that the damage can be split amongst a group of other creatures. In fact, if you give the boss some helpers, you don't really need to do anything to the boss creature stats at all, and you should be able to run it completely raw from the monster manual, because adding a couple of helpers instantly solves a lot of the problems that solo boss encounters have. And at number 2, kind of an addition to the previous spot, don't know which minions to add to a boss fight in order to make them more balanced? Well, in Volo's Guide to Monsters, there's actually a lot of creatures that kind of mimic player classes, and are incredibly basic in what abilities and attacks they can do, which makes them the perfect templates in order to modify for whatever you might need without having to understand the intricacies of its stat block. If you're in a somewhat high-level campaign, there are 3 CR9 creatures called the Evoker, Champion, and War Priest that are basically a spellcaster, healer, and a frontline fighter or ranger, as the champion can fill both of those roles. If you want a slightly lower level minions to modify, there's the Veteran at CR3, which is basically a lower CR champion and can act as a frontline bruiser. There's also the CR3 Archer, which is a great range character, and when it comes to spellcasters, there aren't any really good low-level ones until CR5, where we get the Mage from the Monster Manual, which has the ability to both counterspell and fireball, as well as the really hard-hitting Cone of Cold with its 5th level spell slot. And of course, there's also the CR2 Priest, which can be used as a healer. So if you want some minions to add to a boss fight, these are some great options. Then you can just change the creatures to be more fitting to whatever boss you're running, and you have perfectly balanced minions that fill all kinds of roles for Tier 2 or Tier 3 levels of play. Tier 1, or levels 1 to 4, can generally be run with default CR rules without incident. You don't really need any of the tips in this video in order to help balance those boss fights. And Tier 4 levels of play is incredibly unbalanced. I don't think it's even possible to attempt to balance those kinds of encounters, as Wizards of the Coast doesn't even try to balance Tier 4. In Tier 4, you can just kind of throw whatever you want at your party, and it probably still won't be enough. And finally, at number 1, is your boss fight going a little bit too well? Do you need to nerf the boss in the encounter so you don't accidentally wipe a group? Well, the simplest way to do this without having to fudge dice rolls or change health numbers mid-battle is to make inefficient actions with your bosses and creatures. What are inefficient actions? Well, one of the simplest things you can do is split your damage. One of the best ways to win a combat encounter is to focus all of your damage into a single target in order to lower the action economy of your enemies. So if you simply do the opposite and spread out your damage evenly amongst everyone, this is an excellent way to lower the difficulty of your boss fight. Even better if you target the high health character first and then start targeting everybody else later, once you feel they've taken a sufficient amount of damage. Also, stop using your control spells. Being able to remove creatures out of the action economy by disabling them with a hold person is a very efficient tactic to employ, which is why it should be avoided if you're trying to lower the difficulty of the encounter. Instead, just focus on dealing damage. And lastly, don't use any AoE abilities unless they're really weak ones, like Burning Hands. For example, a dragon's fire breath is where most of its damage comes from. And the simplest way to make a dragon fight easier is to have it grounded and actually use its multi-attack action every turn, rather than just having it fly around out of range and shooting its breath weapon. In order to employ inefficient tactics, you kind of have to know what the good tactics are in the first place. But this is one of the best ways to actually nerf a combat encounter mid-fight, without having to hide your rolls or change health values.